Anytime.
Good morning. Welcome to the Rules Committee. The gentlewoman from New York and I had a little bit of a fun time this morning. I got into a fight with my razor blade this morning, Mr. Kingston, and I was not bleeding to death, but a few Democrats looked at me and wondered if I might be. And,
no, I think he was going for an order.
And Louise simply accused me of missing my ear or whatever and going for my neck. But, it's a little bit of humor perhaps this morning at a very serious time. And in fact, that is why we're here today, because this is serious time and the American people are looking for each of us not only to do what we're supposed to get done, but to do it in a way to where we advance the causes of more freedom and opportunity. I want to thank everybody for joining us today at the Rules Committee as we meet to consider 5 appropriations bills which are designed to take pieces of the government and actually to open them back up. First of all, national parks and museums. And to our veterans, to pay members of the military reserve, to fund the National Institute of Health, and to make sure that we continue on the pathway for a comprehensive CR. Just yesterday, the President and our friends in the Senate refused to approve funding that would have allowed World War II veterans to participate in honor flights for the opportunity to visit their own memorial. 5 of these flights will bring veterans from my home state of Texas, including 41 World War II veterans aged 84 to 96 from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which I represent. So I am well aware that these honor flights are important to people in all of our congressional districts, whether we be Republican or Democrat. While the measures before the committee today are not the complete solution to the House Republican answer of reopening the government that we've sought for nearly 3 weeks, they serve as a small, incremental piece part to make sure we go towards restoring critical funding for the government operations. And as I and my colleagues here at the Rules Committee consider this, we want to make sure that we go sell this on the floor as a good idea of continuing our work in Washington, D.C. I'd like to yield, if I can, now to the ranking member, the gentlewoman from New York, for any opening statement she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think I can certainly agree with you that this is a piecemeal approach. That need not be. We can't run the United States government piecemeal. One of the worst things about it is that this whole idea started to try to kill the health care bill, which went into effect yesterday with the exchanges. And I need to report that the state of New York had over 7.5 million people access the computer for the New York State Exchange. I don't know what's happening in the states where you guys aren't going to let anybody have insurance, but New York is looking good. And that game should be over. If we want to open the government, all we have to do is vote out the CR that the Senate has already voted. We could vote it today at noon, get it to the President, the government would reopen tonight. The idea of picking piece here and a piece there to try to assuage something, and I'm not sure what, because I do need to point out for the record that on the Veterans Bill yesterday that came up, there was $11 billion less for veterans in that proposal yesterday than in the appropriations bill that passed in June, I believe. And there's $6 billion in your proposal now still, less than in the clean version of the CR. So if we're trying to help veterans here, we're going backwards. And I think veterans are wise enough to understand that. So our side is not going to support a piecemeal approach. And you know how I feel about the NIH, because I must have said here at the Rules Committee a million times that I know from the Human Genome Project that they are on the verge of finding the cure for cancer. And that as a scientist, I know you cannot turn research off and on, and that's what's happening. And I'm sure that the reason you're doing that one today is because the director, Dr. Francis Collins, said yesterday that they are just about on the ropes. They don't have enough people to do any work. But it's more important than that. The uncertainty in this government of what's going to happen next week is destroying the whole fabric of what we're trying to do here. We just cavalierly to throw 800,000 people onto the street with no pay to try to stop health care. For heaven's sakes, wake up and understand that health care is going to be there. Health care did okay. It did fine yesterday. Give up this charade. Stop this self-inflicted wound. Let our government open. All you have to do is let this Rules Committee go down. We don't even need the Rules Committee. Go down and vote on the CR, take it up, send it to the President of the United States, who would sign it in a New York minute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate the gentlewoman for her comments, and I would remind the committee that what we're for is to extend opening up the areas, including important areas like the National Institute of Health, and to put them on the CR level. I would yield to the gentlewoman.
What about the rest of the health agencies? What about the whole rest of that whole appropriations bill? What about food safety, which could come in there? And frankly, is a health hazard, as Ms. Laurel and I know, because we fight constantly on it. The fact that they're not important, you know, we are at the point now where we're letting other countries inspect their food before it comes into the United States. I hope nobody feels good about that. I want to wait till Mr. Laurel speaks. But you can't just pick out the NIH out of that whole bill and say we're going to open up that. Unless you're intending to do this for 2 more years and open one section at a time. This is craziness. You know better than that. All of you are much better than that. And nobody's going to hold it against you today if you bring up the CR. We would be really happy to see it done. We welcome you with a great hand of friendship to come back to govern and to have a government that we can govern with. Thank you.
I appreciate the comments that the gentleman makes. And in fact, the committee today has some of the best representatives of that represent our colleagues to speak exactly about not only what you and I are here for, but really to make sure we're aiming at the issues of why we're here today. And I want to welcome the gentlewoman, Mr. Lauro. I want to welcome Mrs. Lowy back. I spoke so favorably about you and Chairman Rogers yesterday about not only how well you work together, but about your thoughtfulness. And today we welcome the gentleman, Mr. Kingston, who's the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor. And all 3 of you are dear friends of this committee. You are cherished members of the House, and we're delighted that you're here. And without objection, anything you have in writing will be entered in the record. I would first open with the gentleman, the chairman of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Kingston. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Ranking Member. It's I would say good to be with you. It's an honor to be with you. As you know, during the 17 previous government shutdowns, a number of the appropriation bills had already passed. We're in a situation now where the U.S. Senate hasn't passed a single appropriation bill, even though the House has passed 5. Last year, the House passed 7. The Senate only passed 1. That really cripples our ability to move forward when we're just passing bills and negotiating among ourselves. And so because of that, year-end has come, and now we're in this CR situation. But after 3 attempts on Saturday night to pass a CR to keep the government open, we're in a shutdown situation. But because the Senate hasn't passed any appropriation bills at all, we're going back now in micro appropriation bills, you might say, to try to put some functions of the government where there is a lot of bipartisan support, to try to just keep them without interruption. And so Saturday night at midnight, we passed a bill to continue the pay for active duty soldiers. It actually passed without a single dissenting vote in the House and passed in the Senate the same way and was signed into law. What we are trying to do is find other areas where there is less controversy, lots of broad support, and so that we can continue to operate those functions. And I think during these very trying times, it is these small steps that can often move us towards a consensus. NIH has always enjoyed broad bipartisan support. The NIH, as the ranking member has pointed out, does a lot of critical research. I do want to make sure everyone knows, though, that NIH is sort of the quarterback to over 35,000 grants distributed to about 3,000 different institutions where this research is actually done. Now, if the University of Texas, for example, is probably a recipient of many of those grants, that money is already funding. That research is not stopped. That research is ongoing. But there is one problem that they could have, and that is to check with the head office and give their progress reports, the monitoring, the reporting of data. There is a question about that being open because the headquarters has had so many furloughs, indeed 73% of the employees here. So I do want to emphasize that the work in the lab is going on, but the monitoring of the results is not. This bill seeks to open up the NIH and fund it so that that monitoring can go on. Secondly, there is a clinical center campus in Bethesda, and on that campus there's research that is done, applied research and clinical research on pediatric trials. Something, again, that should be non-controversial and bipartisan in support. This legislation today would fund that. And so what we do is take the existing NIH funding level and basically put it on its own freestanding appropriation bill, and we hope that it will pass the same way the military pay bill did without dissent, and we can get it into law and make sure there are no glitches. So with that, I yield back.
I appreciate the gentleman. I would now defer to the full committee ranking member, the gentlewoman, Ms. Lowy, for any comments she chooses to make. Gentlewoman is recognized and welcome.
Thank you very much, Chairman Sessions. I want to make it very, very clear that these bills are wholly unacceptable because they ignore our constitutional duty to keep the whole government running. For weeks, we have heard that Republicans will pass a bill to keep the government running if we delay, defund, deny affordable health care to Americans. Today, we're in the second day of the Republican shutdown and the second day of enrollment for the Affordable Care Act. The Republicans have lost the battle on health care, and their response is to manufacture a reckless government shutdown. We know the bills under this rule will not reopen government. They will not allow the 800,000 Americans on furlough to go back to work. They will not allow the CDC to administer immunization and infectious disease control. They will not fund Head Start centers that would normally get annual funding earlier this month. They will not invest in job training centers that are dependent on their expected allotment of funds. They will not allow food inspections to continue to protect the American food supply. And they will not give meals and food assistance to seniors and poor children who depend on them to eat. These bills are political theater. They don't even achieve the goals the Republicans claim. The Guard and Reserve bill is limited to military pay accounts. Of course, we support paying the brave men and women preserving our lives and freedoms. Unlike this bill, we also want to provide the materials necessary to support our Guard and Reserve, to train and equip them. These funds are still shut down. Voting for the VA mini-CR, as I mentioned yesterday, is a vote to cut $6.1 billion from the VA bill that we passed earlier this year. And the Parks bill leaves out funding for firefighting. This is just a small example of the problems with this process. So these bills are not designed to solve problems. They are designed only to help the Republicans shift blame for the most evident result of the shutdown. Closed national parks, threats to veteran benefits and life-saving research, effects on the men and women in uniform. Republican wants to oil squeaky wheels and forget about the rest. So I want to make it very clear. The rule we should be discussing today is on the compromise bill. It's your number, the compromise bill, passed in the Senate, which we know the President will sign. We could do that probably in 5 minutes. Bring up that compromise bill, send it to the Senate, they'll agree, send it over to the White House, and it'll be signed, and not keep this government shut down.
Ms. Loy?
Yes.
It doesn't have to go back to the Senate. It
Oh,
goes directly
thank
to the
you.
President. You're
Thank
welcome.
you. I appreciate that. It's a good thing we have a rules person listening carefully. So it's even quicker than that. You're right, because that was the bill that the Senate already voted for. We know the President will sign that bill to keep the government running. It would cover the National Institutes of Health. It would cover veterans' benefits. It will cover the National Guard and Reserve. It will cover D.C., national parks, every other function of government that we are responsible for. So let 800,000 Americans on furlough go back to work. And I just asked my friends on the Rules Committee, just let's get a vote on the clean CR, let's open up the government, put people back to work, and serve the constituents. This is our responsibility, and I think the people out there in our communities are just fed up with this gamesmanship that's going on. And as you heard, and we discussed it yesterday, there are lives at stake there, whether it's food inspectors or the NIH or the CDC. So let's get to work. Let's pass that compromise CR. Let's do it today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the gentlewoman not only for being here, but for taking the time. Mr. Kingston, with great relief, knew that you would be here and felt like you'd have help right at the top. And you've showed up just to do that, so thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Mr. Lauro serves as the ranking member of the Labor Subcommittee and works with Mr. Kingston, and we're delighted that you're here, and the gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank my colleagues here testifying as well as my colleagues on the committee. The NIH funding bill being considered by this committee is a cynical and, quite frankly, it is an offensive political ploy by the majority. Let us call this charade for what it is. This is another desperate attempt by irresponsible lawmakers to kill the appropriations process in the House and to stop government from working. This new bill, and many like it, are not serious legislative solutions to the problem that the majority has created for America. Right now, the American economy is bleeding $300 million a day because of this self-inflicted shutdown. That will only get worse as this shutdown continues. If this majority was in any way serious at the moment, it would keep the government running in full and it would negotiate on a budget deal. Instead, we are caught up in a circus that has been created by a tiny and, yes, irresponsible faction in both houses of Congress. Quite frankly, and I think it was maybe a Republican, but certainly someone who was not a Democrat early this morning on one of the talk shows have said that this is such a stretch because the majority has taken themselves into a blind alley. First, I've said this before this committee. 27 years ago, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I survived. 27 years ago, not with all the medical technology and research that has continued subsequent to my diagnosis. I was treated, and I was fortunate, and I've said this before because I believe it deep in my gut, that it was because of the grace of God and because of the research at that time that I'm able to speak here this morning and talk about biomedical research. I know the importance of it firsthand. On this committee which I have served, and on the subcommittee where I have served for over 20 years, my colleagues and I, in a bipartisan way, with a Ralph Regulin, a John Porter, and others, and a Bill Natcher, we came together to double support for the NIH between 1998 and 2003. On the one hand, I suppose I should be glad that this majority finally has shown some interest in the importance of the NIH to our health and our economy. The institutes have been hurting, and the pace of life-saving biomedical research has been stalled as a result. The NIH has lost 20% of its purchasing power over the last 10 years. What does that mean? That is, it's had a diminished ability to fund research, a diminished ability to conduct clinical trials, and ultimately a diminished ability in their ability to develop new life-saving treatments. In 2011 and 2012, only 18% of the proposals were supported, the lowest success rate in NIH history. The number of research grants right now is at the lowest level since 2001. But the bill before us falls well below the president's request for the NIH. And once again, it tries to make deep and damaging automatic cuts to the NIH because of the sequester permanent. If you factor in population and growth and inflation, funding for NIH is over 14% below what it was in 2010 before the majority took over. Let's be clear. I believe the majority's true colors on this issue have already shown through on this. Neither the Appropriations Subcommittee nor the full committee has marked up a bill containing NIH funding. In fact, the subcommittee was slated to mark up a funding proposal by the majority that included a deep and a dangerous cut to the NIH, a $1.5 billion cut. But the markup was canceled at the last minute. And in fact, the only subcommittee that did not get a hearing in subcommittee or full committee has been the Labor, Health, Education, and Human Services Subcommittee. And it's not because of not asking. And my good friend, Chairman Kingston knows I asked and I wrote at every opportunity, please bring up the labor HH bill because of what it means to the American people. After the Defense Appropriations Bill, it is the labor H bill that has the greatest scope of programming which affects people's lives in this country and the largest number of resources. Bill Natcher used to say about this bill, it is the people's bill because it affects every single part of people's lives. Medical research is vitally important. It is only one of the important things our government does. We feed women and children living on the edge. 9 million have been cut off from nutrition support. We keep track of infectious diseases. Why aren't we saying the same for the CDC? It is immunization, as the ranking member of the full committee has pointed out. It is public health preparedness. It is also about infectious diseases. It is about, we're getting into a flu season. Why aren't we afraid of what will happen to immunizations? Why aren't we talking about the FDA, food safety, drug safety? And let me just tell you this morning, if you watch the news, there has been a recall of beef in the nation because it is found to have been in the school lunch program. These are safety issues. These are about threatening our lives. HRSA, Health Resources Agency, that's about community health agencies. They provide 23 million people in this nation with health care, often primary health care. We provide meals to low-income seniors. We support food banks for hunger. We shelter the homeless. We further the march of science. We provide job training for the unemployed and returning veterans. We ensure access. Mental health services is being cut back. SAMHSA, at a time when people are saying, let's not worry about background checks for guns. Let's do something about mental health services. And at the same time, we are cutting off mental health services. 67% of adults and 80% of children in this nation who need mental health services are not getting them because the resources are not there. We educate the disadvantaged and disabled. Where is the funding for these and other important activities? If the Speaker, if the Majority Leader had shown true leadership, they would have listened to the American people, negotiated a budget in full over the many months since the last budget resolution. Instead, they have continued to listen to an extreme wing of the party. We are members of Congress. It is time to act like responsible adults. I know the chairman of the Appropriations Committee has tried to do this, and he has failed because of the constraints that have been put upon him by his party's leadership. They are too concerned with their own futures instead of the future of this great nation. I can remember the time not so long ago when this majority cried about getting back to the so-called regular order, derided us for producing structured rules on some appropriations bills. Now this majority is producing closed rules, completely ignoring the committee process of marking up a bill. It is clear that the majority is cherry-picking important programs like the NIH to fund in these mini bills, but not because they care about these issues, but because they are playing politics. It's not responsible leadership that our citizens deserve. We do not fund government on a piecemeal basis, based on whatever issues the majority thinks can gain them the most political points. This is not a game. We're not talking here about roads and bridges. We are playing fast and loose with people's lives. I urge my colleagues, all of my colleagues, oppose this cynical resolution. Mr. Chairman, perhaps the House majority should start to listen to their constituents who overwhelmingly oppose these political games. The course that has been charted this week is reckless. It risks the health of our economy, and more importantly, it risks the health and the well-being of American families. I urge you to please rethink it. And I thank you for allowing me the time you have to be able to speak before this committee.
I want to thank the gentlewoman. I hope that she would know, as Mrs. Lowy knows, as the gentleman, Mr. Kingston knows, your testimony to this committee is most important. Your perspective that you have, your insight that you have, the knowledge that you have is very important to this committee. I would just like to say that as you spoke, I did some checking with the gentleman, Mr. French, of this staff here at the Rules Committee, and he's advised me that, just so we're aware, that out of the agriculture process and the cattle and chicken, the funding for inspectors is still going on, and that under, as you discussed, some of the food problems, as part of the high risk that takes place under the FDA, they are looking at these things in CDC. Those would be included within the current funding that they're operating on under today. I do not want to diminish what you said. I simply wanted to offer some clarification. If I'm wrong, I'm sure the gentlewoman would be pleased to correct.
I would just say with regard to the CDC, Mr. Chairman, that portion of this overall bill has been on successive occasions underfunded. And as a matter of fact, the issue of the CDC, which they have, we're cutting short the money for the Center for Disease Control, on the one hand through the appropriations process, saying that the funding for CDC would come from the prevention fund of the Affordable Care Act. Now, we know that there have been many attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act and thereby, in effect, repealing the prevention fund, which was being used as a substitute for an appropriation. So, in fact, getting this at both ends. So CDC has been woefully shortchanged over the last several years, creating enormous problems for them to be able to meet the needs that they have been charged with in terms of infectious diseases and immunization and public health preparedness.
Yes, ma'am, and as you adequately discussed with me as a far better understanding of how this works than I do, you know that that is mandatory funding that continues today then, if it was under the Affordable Care Act, because the Affordable Care Act and the pieces of that are under mandatory spending. I would now like to yield myself such time as I may consume. I appreciate the opportunity for each of you to be here today. I was not here in prior shutdowns, but what I would tell you is this, is that the House of Representatives and the leadership of the Republican Party, of which I represent and have represented for 5 or 6 years, is trying to find ourselves and put ourselves in tune with the American people. A few years ago, we believed and understood, as a result of not just the stimulus, but the unrelenting legislative agenda that took place first under Speaker Pelosi, our dear friend, and then under President Barack Obama, was an assault on the American taxpayer and the free enterprise system. We, as Republicans, began the process way early on. We aren't, there's a saying in Texas, whether you're cool, whether your country before it was cool. Well, we were cool to the idea of health care, a government-run system, a long time ago, and every single House Republican back then and today, including our senators, voted against this. We think it's a bad idea. We talked at the time about not just better ideas, but that we should aim at helping the uninsured, which at that time were about 46 million people. As you remember, your plan took in about 23 million people that you covered. But it put huge demands, constraints, and changes upon the rest of Americans who had insurance. And the plan, which then went to the floor and passed, that has taken years and years to figure out and discover, and the President's still trying to figure it out, doesn't just help the 23 million Americans who are uninsured. It doesn't just help them, but it places a huge burden on those that are employers and small business people. And even as early as February of this year, we discovered that Delta Airlines came to the White House and said, this will cost Delta Airlines $100 million more in health care in the first year. But we have since seen, as the American people have become more aware of this, even huge members of the AFL-CIO have come and argued, I believe strenuously, that this will turn us into a part-time America. And the 40-hour work week and the standard that this bill puts on people is unrelenting on employers, where they're trying to do workarounds, they're dropping people. We hear every day about a new large employer in this country that can't make their business model work with this new government-run healthcare system. So what happens is Republicans, as we saw it then, as we see it today, because I'd been a candidate in '94 when Mrs. Clinton was trying to push what was then known as Hillary Care, which is essentially the same thing. We are listening to the American people. We recognized back in 1995, when President Clinton at that time fought with Republicans over this exact same kind of issue, funding of the government, it saved $80 billion moving forward, and that was the price tag that came out of this, the shutdown at that time, $80 billion. The next January, President Clinton appeared before Congress and said, the era of big government is over. And that was an acknowledgement that what happened in that fight caused the American people to believe again in a properly run government that could be efficient, that wasn't bloated, and did not consume so much of their tax dollars that we were harming the creation of jobs, and lastly, not going to add to the deficit of this great country. The bottom line is that the way the president is running this country, far fewer than 50% of people approve of what he's doing. And it's not because they don't like the man, because I like the president. I think he's a very warm and gracious man. It's because the direction that we are headed. So, House Republicans, including our leadership, are here to say we want to save the 40-hour work week. We want to save the millions and millions and millions of people who are going to lose their health care and find themselves into a government-run program that politely is called an exchange. But the bottom line is that was not their first choice. We believe Americans ought to have their first choice. We believe Americans should be able to get up and go to work and have a benefit from that work, just like unions did years ago as they made life better for millions of people. So the Republican Party is here, not on a shrill activity, but on an activity directly related to saying it's a mistake. It's a mistake to kill the 40-hour work week. It's a mistake to put off on employers and individuals the way this has been done. And we are going to put our stake in the ground. We may bust our pick doing this, but it is a worthy project. And so that's why we're here. Now, the last part is why we're also here today is that we believe, even though it's not the end all, because it's not, that we want to reopen parts of the government, and we're trying to pick the most essential parts where we think we've got bipartisan agreement. The gentleman, Mr. Kingston, said he actually went to the chairman of the committee, Mr. Rogers, and said, I think I can bring up critical areas of the government that we can all agree on. And that's what we're asking all members of Congress to do today. And that's why Mr. Kingston, through the chairman, said, I'd like to be there tomorrow at 10:15 a.m. We were a minute or two late, and I apologize to the gentleman, but we are here getting our work done. Now, we've heard your story. You've heard my story. Let's see if we can make progress. Gentlewoman from North Carolina is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I appreciate your comments and for your setting the stage for what it is that we're doing, and I have no questions.
Gentlewoman yields her time. Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciated your comments there. I've heard this thing about Delta Airlines before, and I must say I'm going to have to look into that because I absolutely don't believe it. Unless Delta Airlines is going to hire about 70 million more people, I don't know why in the world the health care cost would rise to $100 million more. And your comment about this being government-run health care, last time I looked, it was going to be run by private insurance companies. I know that you're going to go to the last stand, and I understand you want to do that, to try to kill insuring people. For the life of me, I can't understand how you're going to be able to explain that. But nonetheless, that's not the issue that's before us today. But I do know that that's what the whole thing is about. I have no qualms about that. This whole debate, shutting down the government, refusing to take the CR, making everybody suffer, not know where we are, losing, what did you say, $300 million a day? This is all because you wanted to stop health care. And now that it's over, health care is moving. That is a mandatory, it is the law. I never, not since my children were 3 and 4 years old, have I seen such obstinacy, inability to accept a fact. Now, what we're saying to you today is please get that CR, which you could do right now, and pass it, and it could go directly to the President of the United States. And if he knew we were going to do it, I bet he'd sit down at his desk right now and wait for it. Because we've got to get this government. This is utter nonsense. No matter what, we all sit up here in our suits and pontificate. We are playing a crazy game. Do you realize, we're trying to make some sense out of this. There's no way to do it. It doesn't make sense. Mr. Laurel, your statement was one of the finest things I've ever heard, not just in Congress, but in my life. You made it so clear what is at stake here, and for nothing. To make a point. The point has been made. For heaven's sakes, today, let's stop this. I'm going to go through this charade here, but yesterday was really pathetic. Knowing that veterans bill you were coming up with and so proud of, now you've got to figure you're cutting $6 million, I think was from the Senate CR. Okay, so if they pass the CR, the VA would get $6 billion more than they had yesterday. But actually, the bill that passed the House had $11 billion more. So this notion that we're trying to help the veterans, they're smarter than that, for crying out loud. They know what we're doing here. The veteran services organizations know they're being used. They're pawns in this crazy thing to fight health care. Think about a little bit about what you're doing here. You're trying to stop a program that has been vetted in every possible way. And you've lost. So please, for God's sake, let's get down here, get that CR on the floor, get it passed, and get the president to sign it, and don't go through all this business today. It's not going anywhere. The Senate's not going to take this up, and the word passed there by some means. The president vetoed. How much longer do we go and do this one House bill to try to make the pointless point? Too many people are hurting out there. Mm-hmm. Well, I think I've said it all.
Would the gentleman yield for a moment? Just for a moment. I did not bring up, I mean, if I was trying to be focused, and I thank you for your kind remarks. I was trying to be focused on the issue at hand, which I think is very, very important, very cynical, as I said. But the chairman brought up the issue of the Affordable Care Act, and I just think it's important to look at the state of Texas. It has the highest rate of uninsured residents in the nation. More than 1 in 4 Texans under the age of 65 is without health insurance.
I can't hear you, Mr. Lara. Would you pull that closer?
Yeah. I would just say Texas has the highest rate of uninsured residents in the nation. More than 1 in 4 Texans under age 65 without health insurance. 5.7 million Texans. They refuse to expand Medicaid, of which, in terms of cost, the federal government said for the first 3 years they would deal at 100% and then at 90%, which would have covered more than 1.7 million Texans. Further, it's one of the 6 states that informed the federal government would not implement insurance reforms under the Affordable Care Act, making sure that insurance companies cannot deny coverage based on pre-existing conditions. So I think just in terms of dealing with the Affordable Care Act, and what it means to increasing the opportunity for people to have affordable care that, quite frankly, I say this, with meaning no disrespect, but I think that is what you have said in terms of the representatives of Texas who summarily decided that this was not good, have not been taking under consideration the best interests of the people of the great state of Texas.
Thank you very much.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. I will yield myself for such time as I may consume. Thank you for bringing up the state of Texas. In fact, it is we are not perfect. But we are a state that is not near bankruptcy as California, New York, or Illinois. This last year, the state legislature and our governor put hundreds of millions of dollars as an increase into mental health services, millions of dollars, as well as billions of dollars more into education, as compared to, for instance, the state of Illinois that gave an IOU to its higher education. An IOU, good luck. And what the state of Illinois did, the university system, is they went and took a loan out on that. So while we're not perfect, we also lead the nation in the creation of jobs. And it would be my bet that as a result of our effective use of natural resources, that we will bring much needed revenue into our state coffers as a result of natural gas and other God-given resources that we have in Texas. Oh, by the way, that exist in a lot of other states also. And those states that are effectively using those are finding the people in that state are better. So I do appreciate the gentleman letting me know about Texas. We have more uninsured people than a total of 35 other states. I'd also remind the gentlewoman we're solvent, we're creating jobs, we have new highways and expansion, and we are not stuck with union contracts and pensions that are burdening our state. So we're trying
Mr. Chairman, does it bother you that people are sick?
I appreciate the gentlewoman.
You can have a state that's that may have all the whatever it is you got, but if your people are not covered and don't have health care, I don't know what
I appreciate the gentlewoman.
profited you nothing.
I appreciate the gentlewoman interrupting me. The facts of the case is that in the state of Texas, we do quite well. And I do not believe I should accept on the high side, question the people of California, Illinois, or New York. I'm simply saying that the gentlewoman did want to bring up some points. I'd also say that those people, many of them have a job. And jobs are very, very important. And I appreciate the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman.
I know you're doing all right.
New York.
I know you're doing all right.
New York is doing great, and I want to repeat,
Chairman.
7.5 million people accessed the state exchange program yesterday.
Well, I just,
Sure,
I've not
I
yielded to
can't.
anybody. She does not have the time, so she can't yield that, and I appreciate the
Chairman.
gentlewoman. So at this time, what I'd like to do is I would like to thank the gentlewoman. I will now defer to the gentleman from Utah. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you saying Texas is not perfect. Utah is. And we have a better health care plan that is being harmed by Obamacare, but that's beside the point. Let me, Mr. Kingston, if I could just ask you a couple of questions, because reference has been made by some people to the concept of regular order, which I assume in the good old days meant on appropriations we have to start the bill, we send it over to the Senate, Senate reacts to it in committee and on the floor, sends it back to us. If there's a difference, there's a conference committee to be taken care of. You said how many of the 12 bills have been sent over to the Senate so far?
5.
Have those 5 bills passed the House? Have those 5 bills been heard in an appropriations committee over in the Senate?
No, they have not moved a single bill.
Let me restate that. As far as being heard and passed out, have they been heard and voted on the floor of the Senate?
No.
All right. So that's where the process has kind of bogged down at some particular time. That's one of the problems, that the 5 bills actually have been heard by their committees. They have been moved by their committees. They have not been scheduled on the floor.
If the gentleman will yield, I'll get a clarification. I don't believe their committee, I think one has passed committee. Okay, they actually have moved them in committee, but not one has been brought to the floor.
Yeah.
And all of ours, except for this bill, Labor H, have been moved by the committee. And as my friend, the ranking member, who I'm served with on 2 different committees, both as chair and ranking member, knows that she and I disagree with a lot of the content of what this bill, the markup will look like, but we do both agree that we want to move the bill.
See, and that's where I am very positive and very happy positive about what the House has been trying to accomplish. But the fact is that the 5 bills that have gone over there have been stopped, and they are not on the floor, even though we have sent them over in regular order and in lots of time to do it. The defense authorization bill, for example, not appropriations, but defense authorization, was passed in June by the House. It had 315 people voting for it on the floor. It was an incredibly bipartisan bill. It came out of the Armed Services Committee with only 2 negative votes, overwhelmingly bipartisan. That did come out of the Committee of Jurisdiction in the Senate on June 14th and has still yet to be heard on the floor of the Senate. The Defense Appropriations Bill passed by an overwhelming majority vote, bipartisan, 315 in the House. That has yet to be heard on the floor of the Senate. The Milcon bill passed with 421 votes in the House, overwhelmingly bipartisan, and still has not been heard on the floor of the Senate. They have had them since July, and still nothing has happened, which is part of the pattern that is frustrating for me. We are talking about some of the other bills that are going on. People have said that the Guard and Reserves bill that's part of this package. does not do enough to actually help with the infrastructure needs these organizations have, which is actually true. But the MILCON bill and the Defense Authorization Bill and the Defense Appropriation Bill that we sent over there, they do deal with those infrastructure needs. And they deal with it under the common number, but still having prioritized it so they solve the problems that are over there. And the Senate has yet to deal with those bills. That is creating a harm. It is part of the pattern of what is going on here. One person did say a tiny and irresponsible faction is holding things up. I agree. It's a tiny and irresponsible faction. It's called Harry Reid. And I'm sorry, but the good senator and his band of merry geezers over there have still not done their job, and they are not moving forward. And passing a clean CR doesn't solve that problem. Those problems of inefficiency in the infrastructure that is needed that would be solved in the appropriations bills that the House has passed by a bipartisan vote would be solved for this nation, and we could move forward, but they have yet to be brought to the floor by the majority leader over in the Senate. That is part and parcel of this entire problem. This issue may have talked about originally Obamacare, but there is a larger issue here at stake, and it is the inability of the Senate to do their work and do their function. It is the inability of the Senate to do their work, and that is causing a great harm. I find it amazing that some of the people who don't want to actually vote on the Guard and the Reserve bill today because it doesn't fulfill all the infrastructure needs are the same people who voted for a $1.3 trillion cut in the money that goes to our military, not once, but in 3 specific bills going over 2 different administrations. There is a clear problem here that deals with it. So, what we are about today are 5 bills that are good bills. There's no problem to it. People object to them because they may not go far enough. People object to them because they consider them part of a game. But there is nothing about the substance to these issues that's a problem. There was nothing about the subjects of the bills that we voted last night that was a problem. In fact, as far as a policy issue, there's nothing really subject to the policy issues of the bills that were sent over on Saturday that's a problem. And in each of those bills, there was enough in there, like the medical device tax, that if the Senate had wanted to actually solve a problem, they could have easily grasped onto one of those amendments and used that as the vehicle to actually get something going, to do something about the CR and other things later on. But instead, the answer was simply no, which is the same answer that came on the other bills that we have sent over there. It's no. Not even discussing it. No, just no. That's part of the problem. Look, this situation in which we find ourselves in here, I've heard all the spin. I'm going to continue to hear all the spin and the talking points from everyone and their second cousins. It's not really about policy anymore. It's about power. It's a power game that's played within here in the Beltway. And I find it a disarming and disgusting one. Because the policy we keep sending over, not just on what we did on Saturday, but what we are doing today, and the policy that we have done in the past with appropriation bills that have gone over there, is good, decent policy. But they have been held up on a game that actually deals more with the power of who actually gets to blink first than it does with the policy. And until the Senate, not just on these bills, and not just on the CR, but on every other appropriation bill that keeps going over, is willing to actually do their part and take them to the floor and discuss them and vote them, that issue is still going to be at hand, and it is not being resolved. So I appreciate what y'all are doing here with this stuff. I appreciate your objections to what's going on. I understand it. I appreciate all the talking points and the spin that I'm hearing over and over again. We can probably all, it's kind of like going on the circuit of a political campaign where you can give everyone a speech by the time you're done with it. But the bottom line is still, I mean, these bills are decent bills. We might as well do them because it moves us forward. It's something that's good. There's nothing bad with it. This doesn't harm anything. And maybe with the one area in which I am probably most acquainted, which deals with the national parks, bless their hearts, this is a good bill to actually make them do the right thing. You know, I hate to say this, but in 1995, when we had the last shutdown, I was not here for that shutdown.
I was here.
Well, maybe anyone who was actually here that shutdown's probably been here too long. But besides that point, I didn't mean that. I just had to get that in. That was too great. That was too great of a straight line to give me that I couldn't respond to that.
Will the gentleman? Our constituents think otherwise.
Well,
will the gentleman?
The bottom line. No, come on. The bottom line here is that when the National Park Service was fully funded, and they still closed down. They didn't have to. They just did it on their own. Putting guards on our monuments that are open air costs them more to actually try to close it down and stop World War II veterans from getting in there than if they just left them open in the first place. There is a park here in Washington owned and operated by the National Park Service. They've never had anyone there. Monday morning, the playground was chained and padlocked. They still don't have anyone over there. I'm sorry, this is excessive efforts on the part of the National Park Service. So actually passing this bill that tells them to open it would be one of the good things to do. And telling them not to play the political games would be one of the good things to do. I mean, let's face it, this is an organization that sent in comments about how Keystone Pipeline would be negative to their park service, even though the closest park to the Keystone Pipeline is actually 30 miles away, but they don't have buffer zones or anything like that. So there are some positive things that can actually come out with this. The problem that we have on this and a whole lot of other areas, problem I have in the military installations in my district, is that first appropriation bill has not been passed by the Senate, even though they have been sitting there all summer long. What the Senate needs to do is to go through regular order. The Senate needs to move forward. The Senate has to do something. At some time, somewhere, the Senate has to do something. They've got to compromise with somebody and quit simply saying no. So I'm very happy to vote for the bills that are coming out here. I'll be happy to do them again. I'll be happy to listen to the rest of the talking points and the spin about what is taking place. The bottom line is, come on. Okay. The bottom line, and when you get me a rhubarb pie, I will yield to you until you gave me a grape one, and it was a great grape one, but I want the rhubarb. Bottom line is still, we are still playing not an issue of policy right here. But we might as well move these forward because there's nothing wrong with these bills. In fact, they do some very good things. But what we really have to have is the Senate to stand up and actually take the bills that have been passed over there in the appropriations process and go about doing it, period. And until we do that, we have failed. I'll yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I just have to say something.
Gentleman yields back. It's time, Gentlewoman, the ranking member's right.
I'll just take a second. But the fact that the Senate couldn't do anything over there because they couldn't get 60 votes to do it. For heaven's sakes, we are seeing now, if nothing else, we're seeing the benefit of the majority being actually able to do some work over there.
Mrs. Slaughter,
seriously, they couldn't get cloture on anything.
The gentlewoman consumes the time. Gentlewoman yields back. I would just add this, that if the bills weren't about spending an extra $1 trillion and taxing an extra $1 trillion, perhaps they could get somebody else to come along with them. That's the crux of the problem, and I do appreciate the gentleman from Massachusetts now recognized.
I'll yield to the gentlelady from New York.
Well, thank you, and I'll be brief. With great respect to all my colleagues here, we are going in all kinds of directions, and we could have a healthy discussion at some point about how the Senate should operate, how the House should operate. I could talk about the fact that the THUD bill was pulled off the floor, even though it came through the committee because it didn't have enough votes, but I'm not going to get into that today. I just want to repeat again, we're here today because the Senate passed a bill, a compromise bill, with the number of the House to keep the government running. And that is what we're talking about today. Keeping the government running. We could have long discussions about Texas and New York and other states and who's doing what better. But we know that there have been over 40 votes about the Affordable Care Act. The Supreme Court affirmed the Affordable Care Act. We're here to talk about a compromise bill. And the chairman mentioned before that Chairman Rogers and I have a very good, respectful relationship, as we both have with Senator Mikulski and Senator Shelby. We could sit down, 1 hour, get this done. they passed the bill with the number of the House. And remember, just to refresh our memories, that the House refused to conference with the Senate on the number. So the Senate, in order to compromise and keep the government running, took the House number. I'm not going to get into the benefits of the House number or the Senate number because we could talk for a long time. So we're here to talk about a compromise bill, get the government running, sending that bill to the White House, and then we don't have to pick apart every little bill. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate all of you being here. I don't appreciate that we're meeting here on this because I think it's clear that none of these bills are going to go anywhere. The Senate isn't going to go along with this, and neither is the President. So all of this is just a gigantic waste of time, which is one of the few things that the Republican majority is good at, and I want to give you credit for that. The Chairman of the Rules Committee mentioned earlier that the President's popularity has slipped, and therefore that's the reason why we ought to be going after the Affordable Care Act. I'm happy to share with you the poll numbers for Congress, and the poll numbers in particular for House Republicans. They're in the negatives at this particular point. People are so frustrated. I point that out. The gentleman from Utah talks about regular order. I'm old-fashioned enough to believe the regular order was the Senate passes a budget, the House passes a budget, you go to conference on the budget, you decide the numbers, and then the appropriations committees do their work and bring them to the respective floors, and then you have conferences and go from there. But we're in make-believe land here. We refused to go to conference with the Senate on the budget, and we are passing appropriations bills as if the Senate has approved our numbers. I'm sorry. I mean, the Senate had passed all 12 of their appropriations bills have gone through committee. There is an issue over there with the Republican minority leader. Those are the Senate rules. I don't like them, but that's the reality. And here we brought 5 to the floor. 1 we pulled. We're talking about a number of bills here today. I don't think the labor HHS bill came to the floor.
If the gentleman would yield, I mean, that's the issue. We're in the House of Representatives and talking about regular order. The fact of the matter is, and here today, which is what my point was earlier, that we've lifted this NIH piece out of the labor HHS bill. We have fly in the face of regular order when, after repeated questions and asking for the bill to be brought up in the subcommittee, it never came up. So we have not, you didn't get to, pass, what you get, what is it, the Monopoly game. You pass go, you get, $200, whatever it is. We didn't get to the first base. We did not get in the room to have a subcommittee markup. And now we fly in the face of lifting this piece out of the fabric of the labor HH bill and says, let's move forward. There was no regular order, and we were denied the opportunity to go to the subcommittee and then to the full committee like the other 11 appropriations bill. Now, I will say that they didn't finish Interior in the full committee, but all of the other bills went through the process. Why Labor H didn't go there, and why now we're deciding that this is appropriate to do and to fly in the face of regular order. I thank the gentleman.
We're not following regular order, either in the Appropriations Committee or even here in the Rules Committee, where my friends have said all appropriations bills will come to the floor under an open rule. I'm assuming that the gentleman from Georgia is not asking for an open rule on the part relating to NIH funding, and the other reality is that we can play this game. I don't know how long it's going to go on. I mean, and maybe the gentleman from Georgia can tell me what is the ultimate goal here? Is it still to delay, defund, and dismantle the Affordable Care Act? I mean, is that still what you're holding out for in order before we get a clean CR? Is that still the pound of flesh that you want from the White House?
Gentleman, yield.
Yeah, happy to yield.
Well, let me say this as somebody who's been here a while, as you have, that, you know, what we generally do in Washington is say, well, we're going to have to change the spending curve. We're going to have to bring it down. We all agree. I mean, it's a fact that the national debt is now 100% of the GDP. It's a fact for every dollar we spend, 42 cents is borrowed. It's a fact that the main lender to us is China. And yet, and it is, the gentleman has been very consistent about, is you'd probably prefer to take more of it out of military, and I'd probably prefer to take more of it out of social programs.
Oil subsidies and, you know.
Correct.
Correct. So, the agribusiness.
But we would still.
Insurance. I got a few things.
But we would still both mutually agree that the numbers are correct, and the objective is a worthy one of bringing down spending. And if the gentleman will continue to yield to me, I want to say this, but here's what happens, as you and I have seen time and time again. We have these big fiscal cliffs or CR summits or whatever, and then it's always, well, let's cut the deal, but we'll get to that spending reduction, but we're not here, not now. We'll have the debate later down the road, and I think that's what the frustration is, that without this kind of fiscal cliff drama, we never seem to get there. So,
I'm just trying to find.
The gentleman, give me 10 more seconds.
Okay.
And so the question becomes, if not now, when? And
so it's not about the Affordable Care Act anymore. It's
well,
about you. I mean, the deal is, and just so you're clear here, I loathe the sequester numbers. I think it's doing great damage to our economy. And if I were in the United States Senate, I would have sent over a CR here with different numbers, because I think these numbers are awful. They're god awful. I'm a liberal Democrat. Let me finish. You know, I'm a liberal Democrat. Make no bones about that. But as I said a few days ago in this hearing room, I'm willing to support a short-term CR at your numbers, at the numbers that I hate. 986 billion. I'm willing to keep the government going. So, you know, I'm compromising in a way that, you know, quite frankly, I find it very difficult to do, because I know these are lousy numbers. I just came from a rally with Head Start providers. Head Start facilities are shutting down in your districts, and because of this shutdown, more and more closing. I mean, in Massachusetts, we have a good governor who's trying to find some state monies to keep them over for a couple of weeks. But if we don't resolve this in a couple of weeks, they're going to shut down. They're going to shut down. So there's real harm here. But I'm just saying, you know, the Senate sent this number over. I don't like it. I'm willing to go along with it till we can negotiate a longer-term budget deal. But I'm just asking. I'm just trying to figure out. So is the Republican line still defund, delay, dismantle Obamacare, or
well, if the gentleman will continue to have the discussion?
Because I was just one thing. Because you can't go much lower on these numbers, because you can't even get a transportation bill passed, because your own members are horrified by the low numbers. What is the bottom line?
If the gentleman will yield, in the context of going broke as a nation, in the context that you and I both agree on that the national debt is 100% of the GDP, Obamacare adds $1.7 trillion to it.
Well, first of all, we believe, and I think CBO shows that that by eliminating the Affordable Care Act, you're going to actually increase the debt. And you know, if you don't want to agree with CBO's numbers, that's fine. We have, you know, so I guess I'm just trying to understand the way out of this. And is the way out of this, from your point of view, to be able to have the president behave and say,
no, I would actually love to see the commander-in-chief take some ownership in the debt that he helped run up. As you know, he played golf Saturday.
The deficit is starting to go down.
The president was playing golf, and the Senate was adjourned Saturday.
He ended the war in Iraq, which was not paid for. He's hopefully going to end the war in Afghanistan, not soon enough for me, which was not paid for. Those are all contributors to our debt, by the way. The fact is that uninsured people who show up at hospitals and need care, that is added to our deficit and our debt as well. So all these things, so I'm just trying to, okay.
But to the gentleman's credit, he's always been consistent about that, and I respect you for it. But where we don't have, remember, in August 2nd, 2011, we had the sequestration was not really supposed to go in effect. All that was the threat to make both parties sit down and come up with spending reforms, and that did not happen, and that's why we have sequestration. And it did not happen because the President of the United States prefers to play golf rather than sit down, or Harry Reid prefers to be off on the weekend. They didn't even show up for the conference committee yesterday.
I reclaim my time.
How is that possible?
And here's kind of where kind of the problem is here. I mean, for 6 months we've been trying to get you to appoint conferees to go to a budget conference.
But now you have them.
No, and you've said no.
You have them now.
Now, when the government is shut down, you say, oh, we've run out of tricks. Let's go to conference. And then and now we're doing this kind of piecemeal appropriations theater here. All I want to know is when this ridiculous drama comes to an end, where I can go back to my constituents and say, you know what, we're not going to close any more Head Start facilities. We're not going to shut down important transportation functions. We're going to reopen our national parks. We're going to get the government back running again while we negotiate a long-term deal. I just want to know.
Actually,
I mean, are you waiting for the president to?
Actually, I think this would be my recommendation for a first step, for the Senate to appoint conferees, and probably this is just one person's thought of it. Go ahead and put debt ceiling, go ahead and put sequestration and the budget, and discuss the whole thing at once and get it over with, because if we do not settle it now, you're going to be right back here with the debt ceiling.
Here's the deal. The president has invited the congressional leaders to a Wednesday meeting at the White House, so I'm hoping that your leader
that's a good thing.
I'm hoping that your leadership will go. But here's the problem we have with your strategy. And I'll close with this. I understand. I mean, we've been urging you to go to conference on a long-term budget deal. All right, we want you to do that, and we still want you to do that. But for the 5 weeks, that this CR, is in existence for, you ought not to shut the government down. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you want to go to conference, if all of a sudden you guys get religion, you now want to go to conference, I'm so happy. The Senate has wanted to go to conference for 6 months. Go to conference on the long-term spending bill, but do not hold the American people hostage.
If my friend will yield, we gave the Senate 3 options to keep the government open. The Senate was adjourned.
What you did was trickery. What you did is try to blackmail the president.
Blackmail the president.
They said, shutting the government down unless you dismantle your health care. That was the choice.
Well, I would say that actually, to quote a Democrat, John F. Kennedy, compromise is the concrete of democracy.
That's not compromise.
And while the president is proudly negotiating with the Iranians, he will not negotiate with the Republicans. It seems a little bit.
Well, I will finish with. I will finish with this. I would say to the Republicans here that there's some Democrats that are in the House of Representatives who deserve to be negotiated with. And then, when you pass a budget and the Senate passes a budget, you negotiate with the Senate. And that's the way the process works.
I would proudly negotiate with the gentleman. I would proudly sit down with you and negotiate our differences to get to a balanced budget for the United States of America.
So in other words,
I
reclaim my time. So in other words, there is no end in sight.
I would sit down with you right now.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. And by the way, I considered that what went on there was a healthy debate by both sides. So normally at the committee, Mr. Kingston, we really try and allow each other to talk individually, but the gentleman, I thought, both held your ground. I thank you both for not upping the ante on that, and thank you very much. The gentleman, Chairman Cole's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hardly know where to begin. Gosh, we can talk about states, or we can talk about institutions, or we can talk about process. Mr. Chairman, as you know, since I'm an Oklahoman, I would be the first person to say Texas is not perfect. But
If
I
the
would
gentleman
also
would yield, the second,
not just
second
yet.
Saturday of October.
I was actually reclaiming my time, but was actually then going to add, but the only time we beat you is when our Texas players are better than your Texas players, and I mean this in all sincerity. As I think anybody from the state of Louisiana can attest, if you're in trouble, you don't have a better neighbor than the state of Texas. And my state was in enormous trouble recently, and the amount of help and the number of Texans that came up to help us, and not just in an official capacity, but from churches and from donors, was just simply unbelievable. And I think our friends in Louisiana could tell you they had the same experience after Katrina. And to my friends from New York, I've got to tell you, when we were in trouble, just recently, the most remarkable outreach to us by people from New York. Cantor Fitzgerald, great New York investment firm that lost 650 of its employees out of about 950 on 9/11, and then brought that company back and set up a charitable donation, first to help its own people and then to help other people. Helped during during Sandy, and came to more. And to my hometown, and Howard Lutnick, who's the CEO of that organization, who lost a brother on 9/11, and his wife Allison, and his sister Edie, who runs the foundation, distributed $2 million worth of help to literally, probably a couple thousand families, and $1,000 debit cards, saying, we know you need something. And they worked with the school system, found people with children that had lost their homes, or homes had been advantaged. And these are people that, by the way, are getting a lot of help from the federal government. The administration's done a good job in that. Craig Fugate, when he's done, can be mayor of Moore for life, I think, if he ever wants to come back. FEMA's done a wonderful job. So, look, there's a lot of good people in every state in the United States of America, and they do a pretty remarkable job all on their own, helping other Americans, even when there's differences in points of view. And maybe we ought to take a little lesson from them as opposed to one another. And I don't mean this in any kind of preachy way. Look, we can all engage in point going. We can talk about regular order all day long. We never had any appropriations bills in 2011 in 2010 under regular order, not one. And I would say we have certainly not kept every pledge that we've made on our side in terms of the operation of regular order. I was actually going to make a point, and I am very, very glad that evidently I've been preempted by the President of the United States, because what I was going to suggest is, I don't know why in the world the President isn't calling both sides to the White House to deal with this. And I'm glad that evidently from the announcement that decision's been made. I think it should have happened a long time ago. I'm not happy with our friends in the Senate. I think our friend Mr. Bishop made the case pretty eloquently. None of us like sequester. We sent 2 solutions over there. They were not picked up, and I don't expect them to be accepted. Just do something and send us a counter. And I think that's what we're talking about here today. We don't expect necessarily the Senate to accept what we've proposed, although we've offered a variety of different proposals. Just send some negotiators over, sit down and start talking. And I think if the President having convened everything, I actually take that as a very good sign, because I think this is not just about this issue. Or we need a global settlement. We've got the debt ceiling coming up. We obviously have the end of the fiscal year. We all know sequester is a very blunt instrument, and we might disagree about the savings. I don't know, but I think we would all agree that it's not the appropriate and proper way to have achieved them. It was something that was designed never to happen. So I hope that's on the table. I hope that I know my good friends from the Appropriations Committee on both sides of the aisle are desperate to have a common number with the Senate so we can go about our work, and that we can hopefully reach an omnibus so that next year we operate on something that resembles normal process. And again, if we get the debt ceiling to where it needs to go, we can actually restore regular order next year. So all I would do. I'm not going to engage too deeply in the debate here. I appreciate my friends. I've had the opportunity to work with each and every one of you at the table. I know, frankly, you're all extraordinarily able legislators and exceptionally decent people. I just hope the powers that be above us, Democrat, Republican, executive and legislative, arrive at a common global agreement that will allow us to do our work. Look, we've got real differences. That's fair enough. But I've been pretty adamant. I don't think the government ought to be shut down. I don't think it's helpful to anybody. I don't think it's moving us toward a solution. But I also don't think, refusing to sit down and talk is very helpful, or saying I have to talk under these conditions. There's a lot of pre-positioning going on here about who's going to have the advantage over the debt ceiling, really, like that's going to be leverage, and that's been discussed on the Senate side. We can't give in to the House, or they're going to use this as leverage against us. Let's just hopefully the President will now convene something that's large. And again, I'm not throwing stones at the President. I'm not throwing stones at the Senate. I'm not throwing stones at my colleagues in the House. It's just time to do what the American people do. When we were in trouble in Moore, Oklahoma, our friends in Texas came up and helped us as quick as anybody could. And our friends from New York came down and were extraordinarily helpful to us. And honestly, they were during the Oklahoma City bombing. This is not a new thing. So if we just put aside the partisan differences that we've got here and just act like normal Americans act, I think people would be amazed at how quickly this institution would regain the esteem that it has lost in recent years. And I think the process, and Democrats and Republicans alike, look pretty good. I think that's what our Speaker wants to accomplish. I don't have any doubt about that. I take the other parties at their word, so I'm glad they're getting ready to sit down. If they sit down, give us a global deal, I guarantee you this institution, in a bipartisan way and in a bicameral way, will get its work done and get it done in a way that the American people can be pleased with and proud of.
Will the gentleman
Certainly yield to my friend from New York.
I just want to make a point, and as Mr. Cole knows, we've been friends, we work together. I have enormous respect for Mr. Cole, and I am delighted with the news that the parties are going to go to the White House. But I think it is very important that we don't get in the weeds and make it very clear as to why we are here. Our friends in the Senate could have sent over a bill at $1.058 trillion, which is the number they use to mark up all of the 12 bills. They could have done that. And in fact, as you well know, Chairman Rogers and I, working with Senator Mikulski and Senator Shelby, would have been delighted to go to a conference committee and work out the 986 with the $1.058 trillion and come to some consensus. We know that, those of us who serve on appropriations, but that didn't happen. So what we're talking about today is a Senate bill, again, it's worth repeating, using the numbers of the House, the 986, sending it over here, and all we have to do in the House is sign on to that bill, and as you know, Senator Mikulski shortened the period of time to November 15th rather than December 15th because she wanted to use that period to conference the $1.058 trillion with the 986 and come up with an omnibus appropriations process, which it would have been acceptable to Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Lowy, Chairwoman Mikulski, and Ranking Member Shelby. But that didn't happen. And just to remind us all, it was months after the Senate came up with their number, and the Budget Committee Chairman, Ranking Member here, called on the Senate, let's have a conference. Let's work together. But that is not what happened. So we're in this position because the Senate and the House didn't go to conference. And as you recall, for the longest time, my friend Chairman Ryan called on the Senate to do a budget. But then when they finally did the budget, no conference. So We're here now. The Senate passed a bill with the numbers that the Republicans wanted, and I would hope that bill can be considered on the floor, despite what's happening at the White House, and we shouldn't even have to go to the White House now because the president said he would sign it. He wouldn't sign a bill that would have a little bit here, a little bit there. He wants to sign a total bill, as we do, to keep this government running. And just in closing, I'm not going to discuss New York, Colorado. My friend went through a terrible, terrible catastrophe, as we did in New York, and we should be there to help each other. And that's why all these bills are so very important. So let's stop this partisan politics. Let's put a rule together to pass that Senate bill, send it to the White House, they'll sign it, and the government will be operating tomorrow. Thank you.
I certainly,
For the gentleman to yield first.
I certainly yield to my friend from Connecticut.
Thank you, and I really do appreciate all of your efforts, and I'm honored to serve with you on the Appropriations Committee. I think you struck a chord with me with regard to the way in the past that people have worked together to come to the aid of district states that are in trouble. And I will mention this because we suffered a terrible tragedy on the East Coast. And I think my friend knows that the amount of delay and the amount of just consternation about trying to provide some help in an immediate way, the way we do. I'm there in a heartbeat. You've got people who are in difficulty. You've got a tragedy that was caused by natural tragedies. That's our function. That's our responsibility. But we've come to a point in this institution. I've been here 23 years. It's a long time. I've never said no to coming to the aid of people in difficulty. And I think that there's some reflection that we have to have, some introspection about what's happened here that says, East Coast, you're on your own, which is essentially what happened for many, many, many months. And in particular, I won't go into the details, state of Connecticut. We're not going to give you the money that you need for this when the kinds of funds that have been appropriated in other states for this reason have been done with everybody major. So I think that is something that we need to reflect on and think about what's happened here. And I also might add in terms of the larger, because I know that people here don't view it this way, but with regard to the health care effort. You have, and with the great state of Utah, a nameless member of the delegation who has said that requests that are coming in from his constituents with regard to accessing those benefits, that they're not going to provide that kind of service to a constituent. And in Oklahoma, I might add, and I don't believe you feel this way, that you want to give power back that would disregard what's in the Affordable Care Act and allow insurance companies to deny pre-existing condition. The Georgia Attorney General, I believe, has made similar kinds of urges. I just say
I'd like to reclaim my
sure,
time.
Sure, absolutely.
I think we've gone beyond the basic point. But I was more than happy to help during Hurricane Sandy.
I know that.
It was the right thing to do. And more than happy to help, frankly, when we had to move Violence Against Women Act. And more than happy to help on the fiscal cliff, which I think was honestly a negotiated and pretty good deal all the way around. Having said that, I think a lot of the resistance here is because of something my friend Mr. Kingston said. Helping's not enough, and you can't help indefinitely when you're running $1.4 trillion deficits and you're racking up debt. And that's going to be as big a disaster long-term for the American people as these disasters have been, maybe worse. But we have an opportunity to get on top of it. I actually am a little more optimistic than most people about this
Well, the deficit's
Because
coming
while
down.
we have fought and clawed, I would go back to April of 2011. A lot of people thought we might shut down the government. We reduced some domestic spending, and we actually narrowed the deficit a little bit. And then fast forward to August of 2011, everybody complains about the debt ceiling deal and how terrible it was, but I noticed both sides seem to brag about the $2.1 trillion in long-term savings that they arrived at, and that narrowed the deficit a little bit. And go to the fiscal cliff, and some of my friends on my side weren't for that, but it saved almost all the Bush tax cuts, but it also provided new revenue, and that narrowed the deficit a little bit. And go to the CR deal in March of this year, where I know my friends weren't happy with the securing of the sequester savings, but they accepted it to their credit, didn't shut down the government. We didn't either. Got that done, and that narrowed it. And now we have an opportunity in front of us in the context of this situation that we're in, the end of the fiscal year, the debt ceiling, everything on the table, to, I think, make a big step in the right direction. Again, I don't expect it to be accomplished with sunshine and roses and no shouting and no differences and no disagreements. I don't think the American people expect that to happen that way either. I think they understand the rough and tumble of political exchange and debate probably better than we give them credit for. I've found Americans are pretty street smart. And they're pretty. They know when to listen to this place, and they know when to turn it out, and they know when to leave it alone, and they know when to intervene decisively, as they are prone to do from time to time, and shake it up. But I would say, again, just in closing, we have a tremendous opportunity in front of us in the next 75 days. And I hope that the first break is the president calling both sides together down to the White House to sit down and begin that larger global deal that my friend from Georgia discussed, that all of us need to happen so that our work can go on. Because, again, if we don't arrive at the appropriate set of numbers and goals, none of us in this institution are going to be able to get work. So I'm going to leave it there and just be hopeful that this has been a predecessor to a productive negotiation that begins on Wednesday, and certainly commit that I'll try to work with my friends on the other side of the aisle, and I'll try to work with my friends on the other side of the rotunda, and I'll try to work with my friend at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. And if we can arrive at a deal, it doesn't have to be the perfect deal for me. I don't think any of these others have been perfect either, but I think the American people expect us to make progress, not just in the individual areas, but on the big problem my friend from Georgia pointed out in his opening remarks, which is the debt, the deficit, and the sustainability of our fiscal system long term. With that, I went a long time, but everybody else has gone a long time too, Mr. Chairman, so I'm going to yield back.
I'm not even going to say anything there. Mr. Hastings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My friend from Oklahoma began by saying he didn't know where to begin. I quite frankly don't either, but I suspect within the allotted time that I'll find my way, the way that you, Mr. Interim Chairman, did, and others as well. Some days ago, Chairman Sessions reflected that we should remain calm, and he could have been pointing certainly to me and to my friend from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, because he knew that our passions were not going to fail to overflow. And to a relative degree, I could add my dear friend and colleague, Mr. McGovern, to that pattern that we have here. On the last day of September, in the opening prayer, Chaplain Patrick Conroy, and it's written in Dana Milback's article published October 1. The quote from the Jesuit priest is, "This is a painful day for many across our land. May those who possess power here in the Capitol be mindful of those they represent who possess little or no power, and whose lives are made even more difficult by a failure to work out serious differences. That was enough of a prayer for several members to say amen. And it's indicative of how much pain even this 2 days is causing. On my drive here this morning, I passed, as I do every day, 2 street vendor persons who had their little shop set up. Most days, good or bad weather, they have long lines. Today they did not. Coffee shops, cafes, delis, taxi cab drivers, everywhere around our country. The uncertainty is causing us to consume less, which in the final analysis will cause us to produce less every day that passes. Now, I will go a step further. I'm not certain whether NSA was listening to phone calls that I've had both at home and here in my office. I hope they were not, and I don't think that it would mean that the president would do anything less than what he was going to do anyway. But I had written before we got the announcement that President Obama should cancel his trip to Asia, and that he should have full mornings meetings with 12 people, plus 2. The 12 people that I would have chosen to meet with, and this is a part of our problem in both our conference and our caucus, is we tend to be top-down. And we ignore, to a relative degree, the extraordinary minds of the various people that are in this institution who do not hold top-tier offices. And so when we finally get our orders, it comes from top-down. It would not have been difficult. The president has a big enough house to have invited all 3 of the leadership counterparts, and that would include from our side, Ms. Pelosi, Mr. Hoyer, and the chair of the next person, I guess Mr. Becerra, or someone to get to 3. And on your side, it would be Speaker Boehner and Leader Cantor and the majority whip, I guess, Mr. McCarthy. And what I would have done to round the figure out is I would have added Ted Cruz and the other person that is assisting in wagging the dog as they run for president. I would have had those 2, perhaps even 3, young man from Florida come over to make it out to 15 of them that he could be negotiating with. And in the meantime, then I would challenge my colleague from Georgia, not Mr. Kingston, my good friend, but my friend Mr. Woodall. He and I were talking on the floor, before meeting, after we had been in rules, and he commented that he would make the assertion, or did make the assertion, that if he and I were sitting down, that we could work out these differences. And so how I figured that we should be going about our business, and I would challenge him. I'll find 10 members on my side, you find 10 on your side, and while the big people are meeting, let those of us in the rank and file meet so we can have some suggestions to offer them. And we have that kind of added responsibility, I believe, that we could undertake. The chairman he is back, and I wanted to, he had said he contacted Mr. French, or Mr. French had told him in response to Mr. Laurel's statement about meat and poultry not being attended properly. He said that Mr. French assured him some kind of way or another that that was going to be taken care of. Well, it isn't taken care of today. If you want to dial the number 1-888-674-6854, that is the Department of Agriculture's meat and poultry hotline, and it is closed. That's just a starting point of how silly all of this stuff is. Now, in some respects, a reporter that all of us, I believe, know, Chad Pergram, wrote in his article on October 2 that the message is the media. And that is basically, without going into the details of his article, that's basically what we are doing here, America, is we're offering messages for our respective sides. How crazy can it be? As a matter of fact, I accused you all, I believe correctly, of losing your collective minds. I don't know whether I feel that way or not anymore because you're so fractured, so I guess you have lost your fractured minds. Because it makes no sense to have brought something out on the floor under suspension as you did on yesterday. 3 of the measures that are offered under this rule here today were voted on yesterday. So you know doggone well that when you put it back out on the floor today, that you may be able to pass it, but why should we pass anything at this point that we know is not going to become the law of the land? So it's not going to pass the Senate. And the other person that I'd forgotten about that should be in that conference with the president is Rand Paul, so that we can open up real lines of communication to the nut wing as well as those who are sensible in this joint, and get on with the business of trying to clear up our responsibilities to the American people. Mr. Chairman, I'm glad you're back because I wanted to ask you, do you believe that all Americans should have at least minimum health care?
The question from the gentleman, do I believe that
yes,
all Americans should be given or made available?
Should have or have an opportunity to have minimum health care.
Thank you very much. In fact, I believe that those that cannot take care of themselves or who are too poor or who are seniors do need that opportunity. I believe that able-bodied Americans, those that do not have young children, should have to get up and go work for it. And I learned this a long time ago from Jamestown. You don't work, you don't eat. And I think able-bodied people should not necessarily be entitled to health care if that's the question. I appreciate the gentleman asking me.
Wow.
That back.
So that then may account for why the Republicans, other than Steve Scalise, who was here last week, and he said he had a measure that he put on the floor and as an alternative plan. But I would be of a mind to believe that if I were negotiating from your point of view, I would pass a health care plan that would contemplate even those who are able-bodied, who are not working and can't find any job. And I want to share with you, Mr. Chairman, and disabuse you of a notion that you continue to make. Part-time employment didn't originate under Barack Obama's administration, nor did the loss of jobs in America. This has been a 40-year process, if not 50 years, of moving jobs away from America and the technology getting as good as it is. Normally, if we were here, had we had cameras when you and I were on the Rules Committee 8 years ago, we wouldn't have the kind of technology that is here right now. We'd have people with cameras pointing and stuff on their back and set up outside. Now that technology has brought us to instant cameras, as it were. Now, when we go into a furthering of this process, Tom Friedman wrote that this time is different. What is at stake in this government shutdown forced by a radical Tea Party minority is nothing less than the principle upon which our democracy is based, majority rule. And he calls on President Obama not to give in to hostage taking, not just because Obamacare is at stake, but because the future of how we govern ourselves is at stake. I agree with Mr. Friedman. I want to just depart for a moment to disabuse my good friend from Georgia, and I'm referring to Mr. Kingston at this point, and I do consider him a good friend, and what I'm about to say may very well help or hurt him in his plight to become a United States Senator. But the fact of the matter is that if a Democrat is not elected in Georgia, then my preference would be that Mr. Kingston be elected.
Sorry.
But,
Well, gentlemen, as an old political consultant, I can assure you, you have hurt him very badly.
well, then maybe I accomplished my intent. But Jack made the comment just a minute ago about the president playing golf, and I just want to make it very clear. We beat up on presidents, not just Barack Obama, whoever is the president at a given time. Different ones of them do different things with some measure of what we try to make out is idle. But it's not idle. Wherever the president is, the White House is. And that black bag is with him, and he has that responsibility to come off the 17th tee, as did George Bush, to come out of the woods and undertake to do what is responsible for this nation. Therefore, there's no problem at all about what the president is doing at a given time. I would like for someone to follow some of us when we are not in session and see just exactly how we go about our leisure time, but that's altogether a different matter. If Mr. Boehner, like the president, could come out of this a hero, if he was to just shut everything down and say we're doing nothing but negotiating with the people that I talk about, he could come out as a hero. Mr. Boehner could come out as a hero today by putting a clean CR on the floor of the House of Representatives. He may lose his speakership, but he would be legendary for having put this nation ahead of his personal opportunity to be Speaker of the House of Representatives. In addition to that, he would do what probably some of us should do anyhow. He would go on and write a book and go make speeches and make some money and be able to enjoy his grandchildren rather than sit around bothering with this crowd up here. But anyway, Dana Milback further wrote that Democrats did offer to keep the government running for the next 6 weeks at current spending levels, which is a minor concession. But then the refusal of the Republicans to consider this deal that involves any deal that involves weakening Obamacare somehow or another is supposed to be good news because doing so would make the already intolerable situation in Washington worse. He says, and I agree, compromise is usually a happy notion. But in this instance, it would invite more chaos if Democrats agree to weaken health care reform. They will have proved that all it takes to change an existing law is for a minority of lawmakers in one chamber to threaten a rebellion against their own party's leadership. He goes on, and I agree. Under that standard, a small band of future Democrats could shut down the government if a future Republican president didn't agree to, let's say, something that I believe in, stricter gun control, or abortion on demand, a carbon tax, a higher minimum wage, expanded Social Security and Medicare benefits, or open borders. And I would wish that I could be here long enough to lead that band of minority to do everything that I just said. If Republicans succeed in rolling back Obamacare, they will undoubtedly turn to other items they have already demanded as their price for keeping the government running. Restrictions on birth control access, narrower Medicare eligibility, obstacles to malpractice lawsuits, lighter environmental regulations, and more oil drilling. All of those things could be subjected to this kind of mobocracy by minority. And somehow or another we have to get rid of it. I will conclude with today's Washington Post, which is an independent newspaper, and everybody may not get to read it at a given time. They only have some 440,000 active subscribers, and I'm proud to be one of those. But anyway, they say in their editorial today, Americans' respect for their Congress has, sad to say, diminished in recent years. But citizens still expect a minimal level of competence and responsibility. Pay the bills and try not to embarrass us in front of the world. Footnote right there, I had a brief meeting last night with the Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which I was president of some 8 years ago, and his name is Spencer Oliver. And Spencer lives in Copenhagen. He is an original Texan, and grew up mostly in this region and has been in politics for a number of years. I asked him about his in-laws. I know his wife, and I've met his father-in-law, and they are in their 90s and they're ill. He described the care that they get in Copenhagen, and that the people, his mother-in-law and father-in-law, have 4 visits a day from home health care people. And when they need to go to the hospital, they are able to go. And health care, yes, Mr. Chairman, in Denmark is free, and they say in Denmark that it's the happiest of the countries in the world. Following on with the Washington Post article, they say by those minimal standards, this Congress is failing. More specifically, the Republican leaders of the House of Representatives are failing. They should fulfill their basic duties to the American people or make way for legislators who will. We don't come to that view as rabid partisans. On many of these issues stalemating Washington, we find plenty of blame to go around. We've criticized President Obama's reluctance to pursue entitlement reform. The last time the country reached the debt ceiling, we urged both sides to compromise on revenue and spending in the interest of long-term fiscal soundness. And that's what I advocate now as a person in this body. This time, fiscal responsibility isn't even a topic. Instead, Republicans have shut much of the government in what they had to know was a doomed effort to derail the Affordable Care Act. That law, in case you've forgotten in the torrent of propaganda, is hardly revolutionary. It is an effort to extend health insurance to some of the 40 million or so people in this country who have none. It acts through the existing private insurance market. Republicans tried to block its passage and failed. They hoped to have it declared unconstitutional and failed. And they did their best to toss Mr. Obama out of the White House after one term in order to strangle it in its cradle, and they failed again. They're entitled to keep trying, of course, though it would be nice if someday they remembered their promise to come up with an alternative proposal, which I have been calling for here repeatedly. But their methods now are beyond the pale. After months of refusing to confer with the Senate on a budget proposal, they demanded a conference committee to keep the government funded for 6 weeks. They're rejecting a budget extension that includes limits on federal spending, the so-called sequester, which Mr. McGovern and Ms. Slaughter and Mr. Polis and I detest, that they insisted on and that Democrats oppose. In a particularly shabby piece of full populism, their final proposal Monday night included a measure to deprive congressional aides, many of whom earn considerably less than the esteemed members, of the subsidy to purchase health insurance that employers routinely provide. That measure was emblematic of Republicans' heedlessness of the impact of their actions on ordinary Americans and their government. Incoming FBI Director James Comey was stunned to discover that his agency has had to stop training recruits, close criminal cases, and even deny gasoline money to agents because of budget cutbacks. As the Post's Sari Horowitz reported, now with the shutdown, 800,000 workers are being furloughed, and thousands of others are being ordered to work, but may not get paid. And these effects pale beside the economic havoc that would be caused by a failure to honor the government's financial obligations, a prospect that looms just a couple of weeks ahead. Speaker John Boehner, Majority Leader Eric Cantor, Budget Committee Chairman and former Vice Presidential candidate Paul Ryan and their colleagues may be in a difficult political position. Honestly, we don't care much, and neither do I. They need to reopen the government and pay its bills and get rid of this piecemeal foolishness that we are about to vote on some kind of rule that's going to go down and allow that we continue our bloviating, and I just got through doing a lot of it, and if I offended any of you, it was deliberate.
Gentleman chooses to yield back his time. Gentleman yields back his time, and I appreciate the conversation gentleman had. I am well aware that that was a broad-ranging thought of thinking and thoughts of ideas. I would say that if Mr. Boehner were here, he would say he's the leader of a great team, and he intends to be faithful to that for the people of the United States. But but that probably the attribute that we most identify with is the word freedom. Freedom, and it drives much of us. Thank you for the gentleman. Now I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Georgia. He's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate my friend from Florida's comments. I happen to agree that this is, at some point, a question about how it is we govern ourselves. The panel raised their hands to say that you were here the last time we went through a government shutdown, and I take great pride in that. In all of those years that Republicans were controlling Congress, whether a Republican president or a Democratic president, there were only, will be the third time that a government shutdown has happened. I came of age during the Carter administration, the great president from the great state of Georgia. Maybe I should say the president from the great state of Georgia. And there were 5 shutdowns during his time. Democrats controlled all branches of government. 5 shutdowns for a period of over 50 days. And so it makes me sad that we categorize this rather than a tremendous burden on folks who are affected by it as somehow a political process being driven by one side or another. My reading of history tells me that shutdowns typically have a lot to do with public policy, a lot to do with how it is we think we ought to best serve our constituency, and virtually nothing to do with how to control power or maintain power. And if my friend from Florida were here, I would tell him I'm absolutely certain that John Boehner doesn't care 2 hoots about maintaining his power. He cares a whole lot about leading a country and about preserving freedom and this institution. I would ask the panel, you all have been appropriators. I often get a pat on the back from my colleagues saying that there's a special place in heaven for me because I serve on the Rules Committee. I would pat my appropriators on the back and say that very same thing. It's not an easy job. And in the years that I have been looking, I honestly can't remember the last time that the Appropriations Committee successfully pushed through this House exactly what the Appropriations Committee wants to do, or even more, when the Appropriations Committee pushed through this House and the Senate Appropriations Committee pushed through the Senate, and we actually governed this country the way we were supposed to govern this country. Could one of you with a better understanding of history than me tell me when the last time was that we actually conducted ourselves the way that we aspire to run this institution? Ms. Lowe, do you remember that, the last time that's happened?
Frankly, as I mentioned before, Chairman Rogers and I have worked cooperatively together with Senator Mikulski and Senator Shelby. And right now, there is a bill that passed the Senate, and all we have to do is pass it here, go to the President, and he will sign it. So this is the way
reclaiming my time, I'm afraid that you make my point. What I asked was, when was the last time the Appropriations Committee rose to that standard that we expect from the Appropriations Committee?
Mr. Woodall, if I can.
Well, in just one moment, I'd be happy to yield. But the ranking member's response was, golly, we have the ability to appropriate by continuing resolution again today. I mean, how many years has it been? We've been doing that. We have to aspire to better. I'm just saying it's a sad state of affairs that we've now defined that as success. Because moving those bills, and I know the gentleman from Georgia wants to move the labor HHS bill, moving those bills, passing those bills, that's how we would define success.
I agree, and in fact, this is why the Senate sent over this bill with a November 15th deadline, hoping that there would be a conference between the House and the Senate so we can agree on a number, put together an omnibus bill that would be agreed on both the House and the Senate. And that is the way this process works and why this is so very unfortunate.
Reclaiming my time, it hurts me to hear you say that, because I do believe in this institution. I think this is the greatest representative body the world has ever known when we live up to those expectations that our constituency places on us. And again, what you have defined as success is having done absolutely none of the work that is required of the Appropriations Committee on both sides of the Hill for an entire year, and after all of the continuing resolutions from when the job didn't get done last year, which was an extenuation of continuing resolutions from the job, didn't get done the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that, that if we could just get 3 more months, maybe we would finally do the job.
Will the gentleman yield again? You were very gracious, turning to me. If I'm not mistaken, the gentleman serves on the Budget Committee. And if the Budget Committee did its job and came up with a number after meeting with the Senate, we could proceed. Now, my good friend, Mr. Rogers, Chairman Rogers, has been asking for this over and over again. If you recall, the Senate was called upon by Chairman Ryan to do a budget. They did a budget. And then we've all been saying, let's have a conference committee meeting. But somehow, and maybe you can explain to us, why the House Budget Committee refuses to go to the Senate Budget Committee and come up with a number, and then we can move ahead with an omnibus bill.
I would say to my friend that many of those decisions are above my pay grade as a member who's been here 2.5 years.
But isn't that correct?
But I could quote the Senate Majority Leader who said, we don't need a conversation about the budget. These numbers are already written in the law of the land. And I want to make sure that I disabuse my colleagues of the notion that the Senate has adopted a House number about anything. Let me ask my friend from Georgia, because he's a senior member of our delegation, and I trust his judgment explicitly.
I appreciate that. You know, we keep hearing that the Senate has compromised on the number. That is not the case. That's only a 2-week or 2-month or 1 month, whatever you end up. But that's not a compromise. That's just a bridge to get you to where there will ultimately be a compromise, because we are about $50 billion apart from the U.S. Senate. So I think if the Senate really did want to negotiate, the first thing that they would do is compromise on a number and say, look, we're not going to talk about Obamacare, but we'll put a solid 1-year number out there for you, and we'll start talking about that. But that has not been the case, even though we hear repeatedly there has been a compromise. It's not true.
Well, help me understand the law of the land, because I thought the law of the land was not what Republicans want, what Democrats want, not what the Senate wants, what the House wants, but what the law of the land is that there's a cap, an absolute cap on what we can possibly spend out of the Appropriations Committee. And then, even if you were to run up to that cap, you couldn't possibly go over that cap, but even if you ran up to that cap, that come 15 days into January next year, sequester is going to drive that cap down to what will be an annualized total of $967 billion. Now, I know folks may not be following those numbers, but the Senate's pushing out 986 and saying that's a compromise number, that's the House number. But my understanding of the actual law of the land as signed by President Barack Obama is that for all of 2014, we can only spend $967 billion. Do I misunderstand the application of the law?
No, the sequestration is still in effect, and you know, that's one of the things that Mr. Cole mentioned, and some of us have too, that if we really want to be serious right now, the Senate would appoint conferees. The conferees would discuss budget, continuing resolution, sequestration, and debt ceiling, and then we would say, okay, the global agreement has been reached. We'll move forward from that. Also wanted to say, I believe in the year 2008, the appropriation bills were passed. Maybe 2 or 3 were put together. That's the number I have, Rosa. I don't know if you have. And
I'd like to answer the gentleman's question directly, because that was a question, and I can tell you, fiscal year 1995, the chairman of the committee was the honorable gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Obey. The president was Bill Clinton, and all 12 appropriations bills were enacted. That is the date. It is a doable process, and Mr. Obey accomplished that. This is not, you know, that the swirl is forever. It isn't. When you have someone who understands and knows the process and is committed to making it work and can bring people together to make it work, like Mr. Obey did, then you have an appropriations process that functions, and that you don't have leadership who will undermine the appropriations process, not move us from subcommittee.
my friend yelled a second.
Let me just finish my thought, and I'd be happy to yield.
Well, let me reclaim my time, because I know you have great affection for Mr. Obey, but if I'm not mistaken, you would also say that there could be no finer chairman than the gentleman from Kentucky, Hal Rogers.
I believe, if you wait till, I do hold him in high esteem, but I will get to my last point. It was when the chairman of the Appropriations Committee was allowed to be the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. And I know that deep in his heart that Mr. Rogers would like to be the chairman of the Appropriations. I would be happy to yield to my colleague.
I just want to repeat again, because this is not very complicated. The chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Rogers, would like to do the job. In fact, in every meeting of the Appropriations Committee, he said, if only the Budget Committee would do its job. The Senate came up with a number. The House, after calling on the Senate to do its work, refused to meet with the Senate Budget Committee and come up with a number.
Reclaiming my time, I don't mean to be presumptuous, because again, I've only served for 2.5. Well, I want to ask, because I want to make sure I understood what you said. You know, the Budget Committee, we have no power to change the law of the land. A lot of folks believe the budget becomes the law of the land. We have absolutely no power to change the law of the land. And my understanding of the law of the land as it exists today is that you as an appropriator are allowed to appropriate $967 billion in 2014 and not a penny more. Do I misunderstand that?
Let me explain the process. There is a Senate.
Right.
The Senate came up through their Budget Committee with a number.
Right.
Patty Murray and her committee came up with a number.
I don't want to get in the committee. I understand the budget process pretty well. I've had some experience.
Therefore, the Budget Committee in the Senate gave directives. This is the way it works to the Appropriations Committee. The Appropriations Committee in the Senate did its work. All 12 bills came through the committee system. In the House, much to Chairman Rogers' concern, because he was very embarrassed about this process, the House Budget Committee refused to meet with the Senate Budget Committee and come up with a number. The way it works here is the Budget Committee dictates the number, and that's why we are where we are now.
You're saying that if the budget were to have been conferenced and the Budget Committee came together, of course, the law of the land requires $967 billion in next year's.
No.
Oh,
The Senate came up, the way it worked is the Senate came up with a number, I don't want to get caught in the weeds here, of $1,058 billion.
That was the Budget Control Act, which there was a
Budget Control Act. Okay, sure. So allows for 1058 is that budget cap there.
Well, actually, Mr. Chairman, I did.
Right. Absolutely.
If I could confuse this further, I want to point out to my friends, if I could.
Mr. Chairman, we have regular order. Mr. Chairman, the transcriber can't.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Yes, sir. I just asked for regular order. The transcriber can't take us talking over each other. And if we want our words on the record, at least respect each other sufficient to let them finish their point.
I appreciate the points that the gentleman from Florida is making, and in fact, as I alluded to earlier, we do want to make sure that we follow an opportunity where the stenographer not only stands a chance, but where anybody else would also. And I thank the gentleman for his assistance in this, and the gentleman from Georgia is recognized with his time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I don't deal much with the Appropriations Committee, with the exception of my good friend from Georgia, who has been a good mentor to me in my 2.5 years here. But I guess I'm kind of asking a question that I absolutely know the answer to, and that is that there's no set of circumstances under current law that the Appropriations Committee can spend more than $967 billion next year. There just isn't. And I understand that sometimes it looks better for our constituents if we appropriate here and we make the mean sequester be the thing that forces it down, but we need to solve that problem.
Did the gentleman vote for the Budget Control Act?
Absolutely.
Okay, that Budget Control Act had a phone number that came to agreement by Democrats and Republicans, which was $1,058 billion. Your time is reclaimed.
The gentlewoman has not been extended the time. The gentleman from Florida previously had asked that I maintain regular order where we speak one at a time based upon a process, and I'm going to insist that the gentlewoman.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize for interrupting.
Is a senior member of this body, and I do not intend to try and take advantage of her, but would ask that she please try and work with us.
I'll try to follow the regular order.
And I appreciate that, with great respect to the gentlewoman, and I thank her very, very much. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized with the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank my friend for what she's saying. I'm not the least bit embarrassed about voting for the Budget Control Act. In fact, I'd tell you it's the best vote I've taken in 2.5 years, and it was one that we came together on. It wasn't passed with Republicans. It wasn't passed with Democrats. It was something that we had to come together on. The President had a role in it, and I think that is the regular order, and that's the way things ought to happen. That was kind of a crisis situation in my 2.5 years in Congress. The only kind of legislating I've gotten to see was legislation by crisis.
Would my colleague yield just for a brief intervention?
I'd be happy to yield to my friend.
All I want to say is I heard you 7 times refer to your respect for the law of the land, and I would just urge my colleague to know that Obamacare is the law of the land.
It's not lost on me that the only way to change these budget numbers is to change the law of the land, and the only way to prevent the impact of the President's health care bill in my constituency is also to change the law of the land. I appreciate my friend, but more than that, I appreciate what he said about us working together. I don't know how we get to a place where we produce a House product, and my friends on the minority side of the Appropriations Committee are every bit as invested in defending the product that you and Chairman Kingston and Chairman Rogers have all come up with together against the changes the Senate wants to make. I don't know how we get to that place where the House and the Senate have a congressional product, and we're going to defend our Article I ideas against the changes of the Article II institution. I don't know how we get there, and I have nothing in my experience. I'd be happy to yield.
Gentleman, I think one of the things that was interesting that you pointed out at the very beginning is that in the 17 shutdowns that we've had, only 3 have taken place with a Republican majority. And the point of that is not to, open up the can of partisanship here, which, has been a theme here and there. The point is that we need to all look at ourselves in the eye and say that these shutdowns do happen with the leadership of either party. And they don't happen in a petty way. They happen when there are profound disagreements in a law or in a spending level or something else. Obamacare is 1/6 of the economy. The national debt is 100% of the GDP. These are profound issues. I do agree with my Democrat friends that it would have been nice to have a conference committee for the budget. But now we do have that opportunity to have a conference committee to put the budget on the table, as we did in August 2011, which the gentleman has called the Budget Control Act. Go ahead and put the debt ceiling in there, put sequestration on it, and the year-end spend and continuing resolution. It is very complicated because one of the things I wanted to point out a minute ago is that the Senate is actually using a different calendar than we are, because sequestration is January to January, and the regular appropriations process is October to October. So there are very complicated issues, and I'm very glad the President's bringing parties down to the White House today. But I also would like to think that the legislative branch of government should go ahead and take its own leadership position, Democrats and Republicans, and start working on our own product and work with the White House on it. But I think it is important to go where you started out, that both parties have had shutdowns.
Again, I don't think I've talked to a single member who takes any pleasure in what's going on right now. It is a question of whether things go on because of petty political differences or whether things go on because of profound policy differences as we're trying to serve our respective constituents back home.
The gentleman would yield, and I didn't mean to interrupt you earlier on, but in response to the first question that you asked, yes, in fact, in fiscal year 1995, David Obey, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, President Clinton, all of the 12 appropriations bills were enacted. Further, with the passage of the Budget Control Act, which became what the law was, with agreement of the both Democrats and Republicans, that we agreed to a number that we would peg to, which was $1,058 billion. That money, as you recall, was on 2 tranches, one for defense spending and one for non-defense spending. That then, with sequestration, that number came down to $1,043 billion. Though in terms of where the Senate has gone, they have The Senate is at a $1,058 billion level. Now, in that 0.3 number, again, the divide was made between defense and non-defense. I might add, which is one of the things which brings these back to today's discussion, is that the defense number was not held firm, and that received more money than the non-defense spending. And as I say, as we were getting to 2014, what struck me when the bill that never got to the subcommittee, with regard to the NIH, I will go back to where we started here today with NIH. The cut there was $1.5 billion. So we have abrogated what was the law of the land. We've come down here, and to come full circle, the committee was prepared to cut the NIH $1.5 billion. And today, we say we're going back to do something, and I make my prior point, which is that this is not a game, this is not politics, and we should take this very seriously, and just taking this piecemeal out when the prior view was to cut the National Institutes of Health by $1.5 billion. Makes no sense to govern by these little mini bills. Let's do what my colleague Mrs. Lowy said, open the government, and let's negotiate for the future.
Yeah, I thank my friend from New York. I'd be happy to yield to my friend from Oklahoma.
I bow to no one in my admiration for our friend and former colleague, Chairman Obey. He was my first chairman when I was fortunate enough to come to that committee, and a person I still keep in touch with and admire greatly. But just for the record, we got everything done in January of 1995 because the Republican majority was getting ready to come in the door. And I think our friends were very anxious to get lockdown spending for the next year, which was the appropriate thing to do. So I just wanted to add Newt Gingrich's name as somebody who probably deserved a lot of credit for getting all that work done in January of 1995, because absent him becoming Speaker, I'm not sure it would have happened.
Will the gentleman yield?
Well, it's not my time to yield.
I would say to my friend from Oklahoma, you're right. The question I should have asked was, when was the last time we got the appropriations process done by October 1st?
2006,
as
under Jerry Lewis.
I'd be happy to yield to my friend.
It was 2006 when Jerry Lewis was the chairman. We did it. And I wanted to get back to the NIH bill, which my colleague knows that I do support NIH, and I also know and respect her absolute passion for NIH. But I want to say that there is something, and I don't believe this bill is cynical either. It has been characterized as cynical. Midnight, Saturday night, we passed a pay funding bill for active duty military. It passed with every single member coming together. It was UC'd out of the Senate, so 100 senators voted for it. The president signed it. No one said that was cynical. And what we have today, and we haven't really discussed it, is a technical correction on that, just to make sure that weekend guardsmen will also be paid. And again, that's not cynical. It's just a continuation of the bill that we already passed unanimously through both bodies. Now we're at a situation where, beyond the political posturing or the political angst or the outright anger that's not even politics, we have an opportunity to make sure that important medical research does not have an interruption. And there are about 12,000 furloughed employees at the NIH. This bill makes sure that they're not furloughed. There is medical research reporting that will be able to be continued if we pass this bill. I also wanted to point out that the bill is actually at the current funding level, which is at $28.9 billion. And the only cut that has gone on with the NIH is an intergovernment transfer of money pushed and created by the Obama administration. It's called a TAP. It's a tax that the HHH puts on its own sub-agencies. And so last year, this about $1.5 billion was actually allocated to NIH, but they did not get to use it because HHH took that money away from them. And so, you know, we're going to get into the weeds of a bill. It's TAP, T-A-P, that is one of the biggest problems that's cutting the NIH budget. And that has nothing to do with nefarious Republican politics. It's just, that is the Obama administration.
If I could ask my friend, do you and your fellow appropriators have the ability in the Appropriations Committee to eliminate that tap and prevent that from
Mr.
happening?
Waddle, may I respond?
I'd be happy to.
I'd respond, and I think your questions are very sincere, and I think we could have a very interesting discussion at some point after the government is open as to how we could improve the process. And I know you care about these issues, but I just want to make the point, the Senate passed a bill at the number of the House to keep the government open. Discussing other bills is really irrelevant today. It's interesting. We could talk about the history and what happened in 1995, what happened in 1996, and how we did this. We could have hours of discussion. But right now, Mr. Chairman, I think it makes sense to get the government open. The way to do that is pass the Senate bill, send that bill to the White House, and then we could put a conference together and have a very interesting discussion how we could work better together.
Well, I thank my friends. Again, I do appreciate the work that you do. I'm glad I'm not on the Appropriations Committee, and you and Mr. Cole can do those things together. Mr. Chairman, I would just say it was Edmund Burke, one of our great supporters during the American Revolution, who said, "No man makes a greater mistake than he who does nothing because he can only do a little." I know the gentlelady is very sincere in her desire that the House take up the Senate position and the President's position and just make that the law of the land. But we do have an opportunity here to do a little. I don't think there's a member in this chamber who would say that these bills on the docket today would not help not just one American, but many Americans. And if we do nothing because we can only do a little, shame on us. I don't know how we get to the end of this process, and I know we'll have to get there together, but we can take a step in that direction today, Mr. Chairman. I hope that we will. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. I would, without making an announcement to the committee, just remind them that in the last hour I have become aware of the President's extension to the House and the Senate, to our leaders, an opportunity to come to the White House, and it is with full intent that I empower, through my words, every member of this committee to use as whatever time to thoughtfully discuss these issues. There's now been a understanding on both sides of the aisle that we'd like to get this bill on and to the floor so we can accomplish our task today to fully accommodate the President. So I would just extend the words that, you know, the keynote speaker is the only person that stands in between people going home normally at night. And so we're trying now to move as expeditiously as we can through this committee to get this to the floor. With that said, the gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I'm not certain what that meant.
If the gentleman would yield.
I guess, I don't know if that means that I'm getting the hook.
The gentleman is well aware that I believe that his thoughtful comments are always welcome. With that said, we've now had another offer, an invitation from the President of the United States for members of this body, and we're trying to accommodate that properly and allow them to get their job done here. Gentleman's recognized.
Well, I know I wasn't invited to that meeting, so it doesn't matter if I talk. I don't know if any of you were invited to the meeting with the President. I tend to agree with Mr. Hastings that you know, while I appreciate leadership on both sides, not a bad idea, actually, to talk to the grunts that have to carry the water that moves things forward in this House and in the Senate. Kind of interesting. I'm hopeful that obviously the President is calling members together to talk to them. Hopefully it's not just to respell the word no. Hopefully there's more to it than that, and I'm very hopeful because, you know, I don't have, like a lot of you, have a lot of federal employees that work within your district, and obviously affects a lot of this shutdown affects those the most. And I don't have very many. But it's just as important to me that we get those folks back to work. You know, it's unfortunate when families get caught in the crosshairs. I think that, all the discussion in regards to defunding Obamacare, and it's obviously very clear where Republicans stand in regards to not supporting Obamacare, put that aside. And the votes may have started off that way, but that's not where they ended up. And I would hope that, and I want to ask Mr. Kingston this, because he made a comment as it relates to conferencing. Are they limited with call to a conference based upon what we passed? Are the conferees limited in regards to what they can talk about?
Well, there is this thing called the Byrd Rule, and you cannot put something in a bill that neither side, neither body has in their bill. So unless one body had something that's germane to the topic, it can't be added on an extracurricular basis. However, on the Senate floor, as I understand it, they could take the defense bill, which Mr. Bishop had mentioned, that we passed June 16th, and they could put the entire appropriations, all the bills on that, and send it back to us that way. And so we could move along very quickly because they would have the vehicle that they needed to put everything there, and then we could have gotten into conference in August, for example.
Will the gentleman yield? It's my understanding that they tried to bring it to the floor. It's my understanding they tried to bring it to the floor, but procedurally they couldn't get the 60 votes. So although the Senate did pass within committee all 12 bills, they couldn't bring them to the floor.
And Mr. Kingston, you had mentioned, in particular, the military. It was, wasn't that many days ago that we passed in a very bipartisan way in regards to paying our military. And the Senate, you see it, has been brought up. But that legislation was very broad in regards to not only paying those that wear the uniform and get shot at, but it also covered some other areas, did it not?
Yes, civilian support, and it gave the Secretary discretion to decide what support was, and apparently, and I'm very disappointed that the Secretary has decided to use the narrowest view. Now, I would never accuse the Pentagon of playing politics. Although it does seem odd, as Mr. Bishop pointed out, that open-air monuments have now been barricaded, along with parking spaces on the GW Parkway. Even though I use this park frequently, because that's where the bike path is, I've never seen an attendant there in my life, but apparently now this administration has barricaded a parking lot, but for some reason people don't consider that petty and don't consider that cynical. But I would say it does appear that the Secretary is using the narrowest scope of the definition in order to maximize the discomfort for civilian employees.
Why would you, when it's broadly written, why would you want to narrowly define, particularly when it affects people that we're talking about, all the members here are talking about, people that are not getting a paycheck? Why would we do that?
I would say there would be some who would question motives. I don't really know. I think that and to me that's what really gets scary, that the bureaucracy jumps into this game and maximizes their politics for whatever reason. But when this bill passed the floor of the House, there was absolutely no question about the intent of Congress, and that was to make sure that those active duty military was taken care of, and then the Secretary could determine the civilians, the civilian personnel who support them. And there were two clauses in the bill about it. It's a very simple bill. I have a copy of it with me. But the Secretary has decided to take on Congress, if you will.
And I'll tell you, from my home state of Florida, and I would hope that other members from Florida recognize what this does to the Florida National Guard. And particularly this weekend, where we're looking at flood warnings within the state of Florida, that this narrow interpretation now, even though we've passed this legislation, we've passed legislation within the House as it relates to the dual certified technicians that affect all of us from Florida, but other states also, is that now those technicians have been refurloughed because of the interpretation of, I don't know for what reasons you would do that when you have clear guidance that you can keep them on the job, particularly as it relates to dual certified technicians, that will keep us safe in the residents of any coastal community. But more importantly, right now, we're talking about my state, the state of Florida, that those 1,000 dual certified technicians that keep the helicopters running, that will be called upon to help provide aid or rescue, we're seriously diminishing our ability to protect people. And clearly, the Senate and the House gave them the ability to do that. And I'm telling you what, I don't understand why on God's earth that they would preclude them from doing that.
You know,
Well, you know what? That's a bunch of, this is what's ridiculous. We did give them the authority to do it. We gave them the authority. This House and the Senate did that.
and I think what people don't understand in terms of the games that can be played is that these dual service technicians actually might wear their uniform during the week, but they are civilians, and then on the weekend,
They're in uniform.
they're in uniform and become members of the military. What we're trying to do today is say that we will pick up that weekend drill for National Guard, but when you talk about cynicism, here's somebody who has the discretion to make sure these folks are paid, and that Congress gave that authority on a unanimous basis, and the Pentagon is deciding to use certain people as pawns, and I do not think it's right.
Nor do I. And so it doesn't matter at this point in time. But when Congress has authorized the executive branch in a very broad way to help people, and that's what all these measures are that we're talking about today, but this is one that was passed, and we try to hurt people. Because this is truly, these are real people that we're talking about that may need our help, and we're not going to be there to provide it. Now, we closed parks, and my first ever act of civil disobedience was yesterday in removing a barrier to allow World War II veterans to go to an open-air park, an open-air facility that is open 24 hours a day. It only has members of the National Park Service there if you want to ask a question for very short selected hours, but the rest of the day you can walk through it. But you know what? We made this fantastic decision to close it, and I had an opportunity to greet one of the veterans who's 98 years old, probably his last opportunity to visit his memorial that he fought for and his friends died for. And we make a stupid decision. And I say we because we're part of the government. We make a stupid decision to close down something that has never been closed, that's open to the general public 24 hours a day without any representative of the United States government being there. And that's petty and hurtful. And I can't stand that we've taken out common sense and good judgment in regards to the implementation of laws that have been passed or not passed here. It just drives me crazy. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back based upon your last comment.
Gentleman yields back his time, and I appreciate his help with that. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clear up one thing. Because there was much said yesterday on the floor by the other side about the dollar amount found in HJ Res 72, and that somehow this bill, this HJ Res would be compromising a bill that we had passed earlier, which was the full bill. However, I think the comparison is wrong because that's not what's before us. There is a CR for 10 weeks or 6 weeks, depending on who you take, for 6 weeks. And this bill, HJ Res 72, just extracted all of the words out of that that continuing resolution and put them on a piece of paper. So if you look at page 15, line 19 of the continuing resolution, the number is $2,455,490,000. If you look at the number in HJ Res 72 on page 2, line 17, the number is $2,455,490,000, the exact same amount. So the idea of telling us that somehow we're compromising, we're shortchanging, we're cutting, we're not. This is the exact same thing that would be before us if we took up that, quote, clean resolution. The same exact number, the same exact language. It's just a small part of that larger piece of paper and package. And so I think it's misrepresenting by saying that this is a cut when it's not. We would be voting for and embracing the same exact number. Now, there's another part to this too. This, different than many of the others, is an increase from the 2013 level. The 2013 level is $300 million below that. Why? Because we're trying to make up the difference of those who are standing in line and waiting and waiting. And so this is even an increase. But it's the same exact increase that's in the continuing resolution. So my question to the chairman that's here of the particular part of his appropriation subcommittee, is that true for yours also?
Which bill?
Okay, I'm talking about just your piece, which would be out of your subcommittee, which we're taking up today, which is an unnumbered HJ Res. And my question is it like this one? This HJ Res just extracted the language and placed it into a smaller bill which just dealt with that issue.
It is at the current funding
That's
level.
all I'm asking, yes.
Yes, it is at the current funding level, which I believe is
exactly what's in the CR. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I think probably if we extrapolated that to all 5 of these, all these are portions of... I didn't say we weren't cherry picking. What I'm telling you is that saying that this is a cut or there's something wrong with it, there's nothing wrong with it. Because if we voted on the continuing resolution, we would be voting for every single issue on this funded at the same exact level. It's just a smaller package that's something we all could agree on. And that's all we're doing. And so, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to clear that up, to let everyone know that we're not talking about cuts, we're not talking about different language, we're not talking about something that's shortchanging anybody, including the veterans. All we're talking about is doing exactly what the continuing resolution says in that particular area.
Will the gentleman use...
And it's the exact same amount. Well, I would, except I don't talk very often, and I don't get very much time, and the chairman's already said we don't have much time, so I want to take this little bit of time just to say, here it is. This is what I think. And in the end, if I hear again, I might even take to the floor, which I rarely do, to say no. It's wrong to say this is a cut, this is a shortchanging of the veterans when it absolutely is not, especially if you support the CR. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time.
Mr. Chairman.
No, gentlemen, give me just a second. In fact, on page 2 of the bill, line 5 through 10 enunciated exactly what the gentleman was speaking about. A gentleman from Massachusetts evidently has a question.
I would just ask the chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
If he would mind yielding to Ms. Lowy, the ranking member, who was trying to.
Well, thank you. I appreciate what the gentleman's asking. I'm also trying to acknowledge that we're trying to get through this, and that the witnesses serve at the pleasure of this.
If she can keep her answer to less than 30 seconds.
You know what? What I'd like to do is continue going. I would not try and cause on you anything that, if it were reversed, and I hope the gentleman recognized that. Gentlewoman.
Thank you very much,
Florida
Mr.
is
Chairman,
recognized.
and I'm
Chairwoman.
very happy to see these bills come before us, and I'm glad that Chairman Kingston has pointed out how we came together and we passed the bill to fund the active military. Now, my stepson, Dougie Leighton, and my daughter-in-law, Lindsay, they were in the active military just 2 months ago after serving many years as Marine officers. They retired. Now they're in the reserves. And Lindsay was supposed to come in for duty, reserve duty, starting on Monday in Pensacola. She got her order saying, you can't come. You can't volunteer, you just can't come. And Dougie was going to Blanding starting on Friday. And he got the email saying, no thanks. 2 months ago, they were active duty. It would have been okay for them. But now that they're in the reserves, we're telling them, no, you can't serve your country anymore. And it doesn't make any sense that if they're the same people that they were 2 months ago. 2 months ago, they were in a separate category. They could have continued to serve their country. They want to continue to serve their country. Why can't we come together just as we did a few days ago and say, let's pass the Pay Our Guard and Reserve Act? They are just the same people serving our country. It makes no sense for us to have passed it in the House, for the Senate to have passed it, for the President to have signed it when they're for active duty, but we're saying to the Reserve and the Guards, no, you're not worthy. You're not worthy of our full support. We're going to vote against you. And I resent that, and I think that they resent that as well. And just one point on the memorial, what a shameful day that was to barricade, as you pointed out, Mr. Kingston. It is an open-air monument. It is there for everybody to go by. To have barricades when people in wheelchairs were not able to go through, that is just shameful. And I'd like to point out, Mr. Chairman, that according to its website, the memorial, quote, was funded almost entirely by private contributions as specified in Public Law 103-32. The campaign received more than $197 million in cash and pledges. Support came from hundreds of thousands of individuals, Americans, hundreds of corporations and foundations, veterans groups, dozens of civic, fraternal, and professional organizations, states and one territory, and students in 1,200 schools across the country. A privately funded memorial, open air, and yet they bothered to put a couple of barricades to make a political statement. Shameful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, gentlemen. By the way, I'm one of those 1 million contributors and was proud to do that. Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Burch, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And recognizing from your comments, I will try to keep this short, but I did feel obligated to share with the committee some interesting facts about the state of Texas. Texas does enjoy a AAA bond rating. If I recall correctly, the United States does not. Between the years 2009 and 2011, 1 million people came to the state of Texas to become residents. Historically, when a state undergoes rapid population growth, the rate of uninsurance increases. Texas, during that time frame, saw its rate of uninsurance decrease. 1.7 million Texans are in the state, in the country, without the benefit of a Social Security number. I don't know if there have been new changes under the rulemaking to the Affordable Care Act, but my understanding of the President's speech 3 years ago, those individuals would not be eligible for coverage under the Affordable Care Act. 2.7 million people are eligible for Medicaid but have not enrolled. So I just wanted to put those statistics out there so that people were aware. When I hear my state discussed in sometimes unflattering terms about the rate of uninsurance, there are factors that make up this number that mitigate. And in fact, one of the biggest risks to Texans who are uninsured today is the recall of disproportionate share funds to public hospitals who take care of uninsured and underinsured individuals. Now, Mr. Kingston, if I could, I do want to ask you a question about the National Institute of Health appropriation bill that's in front of us today. On page 4, a little bit on the end of page 3, but the authority under this section shall not be used until after the department or agency has taken all necessary actions to reduce or defer non-personnel related administrative expenses. It seems pretty straightforward. My understanding is within the budget for the appropriation for the National Institute of Health, there is something that's called the HHS TAP. That is 2 to 3% of the monies appropriated for the National Institute of Health actually come back to the Department of Health and Human Services and are used for whatever purpose the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services sees fit. Am I correct about that?
You are. It's actually 2.5%, and the administration wants to increase it to 3.2%. What our bill would do is put it at 1%, but the effective spending level after that is about $2.8 billion. So this is a level spending proposal for the NIH.
Does my read of the language in your legislation mean that that money, which is now that shakedown that occurs at NIH by HHS, is that going to continue to occur, or are we putting a stop to that with this language?
With this language, we put a stop to it. We're trying to put a stop to it. I'll say that if we can get it through the Senate. But it is something that, you know, we'll probably have a debate about, because we don't know why the administration always has to have such a. It is a shakedown. It's an intergovernment transfer of money, which I think goes around the appropriations process.
Well, I hope you're successful in doing that. I find that disturbing that occurs where we talk about the NIH money that is not allowed because of the sequester, and yet at the same time we are literally vacuuming their wallets for this HHS TAP. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. And I want to thank the gentleman very much. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, made an important point to me, and that is, in the fairness to each of our members, to extend them 30 seconds, I will double that, and I would ask that each of the persons on the panel would be extended 1 minute to clarify or to summarize what they choose. And for 1 minute, the gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized. Does the gentlewoman not seek time? Then the gentlewoman is extended 1 minute. Gentlewoman. Thank you very much. If gentlewoman could please pull the microphone to her, we'd appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I think that what we have, there are 2 points here to be made. One, I think it's very, very clear that what is occurring is, without an effective plan to figure out how to get out of the box that the Republican majority has put itself in shutting down the government, and of, quite frankly, not being able to defund the Affordable Health Care bill. It was launched yesterday, that they've shut the government down, but they didn't do that. So now they are looking for ways in which to mitigate against what has become a very popular outcry against just a reckless and irresponsible activity. So, given that, what they have taken to do is to cherry pick areas of the budget, and in this case, with regard to the NIH, it comes from a bill that, in fact, never saw the light of day in subcommittee, full committee, or on the floor of the House of Representatives. It is just to say, we care about sick people. And instead of, and with, I might add, something of a moving forward, where they were going in 2014, was to, in fact, cut the NIH budget. I think it is a political ploy, and it really demands what our roles are as members of Congress. We have the opportunity to open up the government. That's what we should do, and make sure everyone who is ill gets the opportunity to get the kind of service that they need in order to survive.
I appreciate the gentlewoman's summary very much, and appreciate her being here. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had some very interesting discussions here, and I'd be happy to continue this in any other forum. But the issue today is getting the government running, not to cherry pick different parts of the government, because we could all talk about the impact in our own districts. The Senate passed a bill to keep the government running. The President is willing to sign that bill. We should pass that bill here, send it to the president, get the government running, and all the other very interesting issues that could be discussed, should be discussed with the White House, with members in the both sides of the aisle could proceed. Now, specifically with the Veterans Bill that came to the floor yesterday, it is $6.1 billion less than the bill that came through the Appropriations Committee. And I'd be happy to discuss it in greater detail at any time that Mr. Webster would like to do that. We'd be happy to share all the numbers, which I've gotten from both the Democrats and Republicans, because they're the same. $6.1 billion less than the bill that the Appropriations Committee produced and came to the floor.
I thank the gentlewoman for her time and her exercise that she's been through today. The gentleman from Georgia, the chairman of the subcommittee, is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, let me say this in regards to Mr. Webster's comments. The $6 billion has to do with the VA bill. What this bill actually does is only deal with VA disability. So it's either confusion or disingenuous for the minority party to say that VA is being cut. They're two different things. They're trying to compare apples to oranges. But let me say this, the big picture. When two parties disagree, if you can find something on which you do agree, and maybe it's one thing, such as military pay, and then you can find something else in which you agree, and maybe a third, and maybe a fourth, maybe a fifth. Well, what do you know? All of a sudden, you're moving towards each other. That's what we are about with these 5 bills today. We're saying we already agreed midnight Saturday night at the height of the tension of the debate to come together for military pay. Now let's look at NIH. Let's look at veterans' disabilities. Let's look at monuments and open-air parks. And good gosh, if we could start doing that, maybe we can get some momentum going, moving towards each other, and getting our differences resolved. And I think that would be a good thing for the United States of America.
I want to thank all three of you, gentlemen, yields back time. I want to thank all three of you for your time today. I know it took about 3 hours. Our committee had ample time, I believe, to discuss this with you. You're now excused, and thank you very much. The chairman will now be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant closed the rules for HJ Res 70, HJ Res 71, HJ Res 72, HJ Res 73, and HR 3230. The rule provides 30 minutes of debate on each measure, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of each measure and provides that each measure shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in each measure. The rule provides one motion to recommit each measure. Section 4 of the rule provides that it shall be in order at any time during the calendar day of October 6, 2013, for the Speaker to entertain motions that the House suspend the rules and that the Speaker or his designee shall consult with the minority leader or her designee on the designation of any matter for consideration pursuant to this section.
You now heard the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina, and I would defer to the gentleman from Georgia for discussion of that activity. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a closed rule for each of these measures, but it provides 30 minutes of debate controlled by the Appropriations Committee on each of these issues, as well as a separate motion to recommit, as is the right of the minority. Now, 3 of these pieces of legislation are the same that we saw yesterday. We saw them get a majority of the votes yesterday, but sadly we could not get the 2/3 necessary for suspension, so those are back. We also, these others were included in a broader continuing resolution that the House passed 2 weeks ago, and those are here today to begin some of the critical funding needs that we have now, begin to find those things, as the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Kingston, said, those things on which we agree, and moving those things forward. Lastly, this rule extends suspension authority through this coming Sunday. To provide as much flexibility as the House can use to address this shutdown. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. The chairman now recognizes anyone for purpose of a discussion or for amendment. Gentlewoman is recognized from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've listened very attentively here today, and what I'm hearing from everybody on the Rules Committee today that spoke it's great frustration with what's been going on. If people are getting hurt, the veterans couldn't go to the monument, the reservists can't go and volunteer. There's a very simple answer to this. As we pointed out earlier, this is a self-inflicted wound. And while I understand by the idea that you'd like to do this piecemeal, which could take us sometime to the end of next year, I want to make a move today that we can do it right now. It would save face for everybody. There would be great relief in the country. And the mention, too, of taking people as pawns. What this shutdown has done is take the entire United States of America as a pawn. Not just people who are inconvenienced because they can't go to a park, but the 800,000 workers who are out there working willingly for a government that they are really beginning to understand doesn't care for them. Their pay has been frozen for over 3 years. They're working under those sequester rules, so they don't know how many of them are going to survive. I wish we could stop this madness, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to do it. I move that the committee make an order, the Clean Senate CR, to send it to the President to sign today. My amendment would get rid of the partisan piecemeal approach, which I don't think any of us believe is a sensible way to govern. It would replace it with a clean bill that could immediately be signed into law. Mr. Chairman, the federal government is closed. The rule will not solve the problem, the rule that the majority is proposing. But this amendment will. And I want you to know that this is the only proposal you're going to get vote on today that will immediately get us all out of this mess. The burden is on you to do it. And so I make the motion that we make in order the Senate CR so that we can go right down to the floor now, vote for it. It would be the biggest bipartisan vote, I'll bet, that we've seen in many a year. So let's get that done, please. Relieve this country of this awful burden and relieve us also the burden of embarrassment before all other countries in the industrial world. I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman. Does the gentleman from Massachusetts wish to be recognized?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to express my support of the gentlelady's amendment. I've listened to all my colleagues here talk, and I've yet to hear a single good reason why we can't pass a clean CR at the very levels that my Republican friends want, the sequester levels. I've been getting calls from people who down here who are upset that museums are closed. And you're going to, pose for pictures saying you don't like the barricades around some of the monuments. The reason why those barricades are there and the reason why everything's closed is because my Republican friends shut the government down. I mean, that's why we're in this mess. And beyond the inconvenience of people being denied access to monuments, you have Head Start facilities shutting down all over this country. Now, none of that's addressed in this. You have nutrition programs that are being cut back. None of that's addressed in any of the stuff we're doing here. And so if we want to try to get to a bipartisan compromise here today, you ought to support the gentlelady's amendment and open the government up today, provide us some opportunity to have a conference with the Senate on a long-term spending bill, but don't punish the American people for doing it. So I just close by saying open the government up today. Open the government right now. You can do it. Vote with us. Allow this to come to the floor. And I bet that I think the gentlelady is right. I think there is a bipartisan view in this Congress. If there could be a secret vote, this thing would pass. And if you could allow it to come to the floor, I think even in an open session, I think this thing will pass. I think a lot of your members who have expressed to me privately their frustration over the fact that we're in this mess, I think would appreciate the government opening while you negotiate something with the Senate. So I urge everybody to support the gentlelady's amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and I appreciate his discussion. I would say on behalf of the majority, what we think we're doing here today is probably some straight-line Republican viewpoints. We want to open up the national parks, the museums. We want to provide local funding for the District of Columbia. We want to honor the promise to our Americans Veterans Act. We want to use research at NIH. And lastly, we want to make sure we pay our guard. And I do understand that because we're in the majority, we're going to use probably our best ideas first, of the things which we wholeheartedly support. And I would just say that if we pass this bill, it'll arm our negotiators, our leadership, with a chance as they meet with the President today, say, Mr. President, we're ready, willing, and able to work. And that's what we're going to do today, so I'd offer a no vote. Further discussion. Gentleman, Florida is recognized.
No, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's not seeking recognition at this time, and I thank the gentleman. All right, the vote will now be on the slaughter amendment. Those in favor of the slaughter amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. The noes have it. Noes have it. Roll call.
Ms. Fox? No. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop? No. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster? No. Ms. Ross Lightnin?
No.
Ms. Ross Lightnin? No. Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter? Aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings?
Aye.
Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk will report.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Gentleman,
I
Florida is
just
recognized.
want to say that with this vote, you've shown that the shutdown of the government is really not that important to you. I'm really dismayed by it.
I appreciate
And I will be carrying it for the minority.
Thank you very much, gentlewoman. Yields back time. Gentleman from Florida, do you seek recognition? Sir? Gentleman does not seek recognition. Mr. Woodall will be handling. Thank you very much. Those in favor of, we'll now hold the vote in favor of the motion from the gentleman from North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Roll call has been requested.
Ms. Fox? Aye. Ms. Fox? Aye. Mr. Bishop? Aye. Mr. Bishop? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Nugent? Aye. Mr. Nugent? Aye. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster? Aye. Ms. Ross Lightnin?
Aye.
Ms. Ross Lightnin? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Aye. Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter? No. Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern? No. Mr. Hastings?
No.
Mr. Hastings? No. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman? Aye.
Clerk will report.
9 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Is agreed to.
Just before you close, Mr. Chairman, did we?
Thank you very, and
Yeah.
I do appreciate it. Gentleman from Florida is
Yes,
recognized.
Mr. Chairman, just ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the statement of the administration, which says that the president would veto these bills.
I do appreciate that, and the gentlewoman from New York reminded me of that. I want to thank each of you. As we started, I want to thank each of you on our staff for being here, also the appropriations staff. Also to recognize that today the University of Georgia has one of its finest graduates, Doug Andrus, who is celebrating his 27th birthday. Hearty congratulations and birthday to Doug. The committee has now completed its work. We're now done for the day.